Stop right there. Picture this. You've traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger, carrying nothing but a battered trunk and a handful of desperate hope. You step off that stagecoach, dust in your lungs, sun beating down, ready to finally claim the future you were promised. But instead of a husband, you get the words that shatter everything. He's already married someone else. No money, no home, no way back. You're stranded in a town that sees you as nothing but a cautionary tale. That's where Clara Whitmore's story begins, in the absolute worst moment of her life. But here's what nobody expected. It's also where everything changes. Before we dive into Clara's journey from abandoned bride to the woman who rewrote her own destiny, do me a favor, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's story travels across this world. Now let's go back to that dusty Texas town in 1876, where one woman's rejection became another man's chance to offer something nobody saw coming. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in a cloud of ochre dust that seemed to hang in the air like a curse, coating everything it touched with the grit of West Texas summer. Clara Whitmore pressed her gloved hand against the window frame, steadying herself as the wheels groaned their final rotation. Through the scratched glass, she could make out the rough-hewn buildings of Dry Creek, if you could call them buildings. They looked more like wooden boxes someone had scattered along a single dirt road and hoped for the best. This was it. The town she'd read about in those careful, measured letters. The place that would become her home. Clara took a breath, deep, steadying, and felt the boning of her corset press against her ribs. She'd worn her best traveling dress, the deep blue wool that had belonged to her mother, with the ivory buttons she'd polished that morning in the boarding house 3 towns back. Her hair was pinned in a style that had taken her an hour to achieve in a mirror barely bigger than her hand. She wanted to look like a woman worth keeping a promise for. The driver's weathered face appeared at the window. "Dry Creek, miss. End of the line." "Thank you." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. That was something, at least. She gathered her reticule, checked that the letter was still tucked inside. She'd read it so many times the creases had gone soft, and prepared herself to meet the man who'd written it. Mr. Robert Fletcher. 34 years old, owner of Fletcher Freight Company, seeking a wife of good character and sound mind to help build a life in the growing territories. His words had been formal but kind, practical but not cold. In a world that had given Clara very few choices, Robert Fletcher's proposal had seemed like providence. The driver opened the door and offered his hand. Clara stepped down, and the Texas heat hit her like a physical thing, thick and heavy, so different from Boston's crisp coastal air. The sun was a hammer against an anvil of cloudless sky. "Your trunk, miss." The driver was already hauling it down, and Clara watched her entire life thump onto the wooden boardwalk. One trunk. That's what 23 years amounted to. Everything else, the life she'd known, the people she'd lost, had been stripped away by circumstances she couldn't control. Her father's death, the debts, the distant cousins who'd made it clear she was a burden they wouldn't carry. The mail-order bride advertisement had been her lifeline, and Robert Fletcher had been her answer. Clara scanned the street looking for a man who matched the description in the letters. Tall, brown hair, usually wearing a dark vest. The town wasn't large, perhaps 24 buildings clustered around the main road, with a few houses scattered beyond. A general store, a saloon with doors that swung on squeaking hinges, a building that proclaimed itself the post office and telegraph in fading paint. And people. Not many, but enough. Enough to notice the stranger in the blue dress standing beside her trunk like a question nobody wanted to answer. A woman in a calico dress whispered something to her companion. 2 men in front of the saloon stopped their conversation to stare. Clara lifted her chin and pretended not to notice, even as her stomach tightened. Where was he? Minutes crawled by. The stagecoach driver tipped his hat and climbed back to his perch, and then the coach was rolling away, leaving Clara increasingly conspicuous in its absence. She could feel the weight of watching eyes, could sense the curiosity turning to something else. Pity, maybe, or judgment. Just when she'd decided to take shelter in the general store, a man emerged from the freight office across the street. He was perhaps 40, with a neat beard and a vest straining slightly over a prosperous belly. He looked at her, seemed to recognize something. Her appearance, perhaps from Robert's description of what to expect, and crossed the street with purpose, but not eagerness. That's what Clara noticed. No smile of greeting, no warmth in his expression. Her heart began to sink before he even opened his mouth. "Miss Whitmore?" He removed his hat, revealing hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. "Yes, I'm looking for Mr. Fletcher, Robert Fletcher. I'm expected." She hated how uncertain she sounded, how the last word came out as half question. The man glanced away toward the freight office, then back. "I'm George Hawkins. I work with Robert. Worked with him. I'm afraid there's been a development." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Claire gripped her reticule tighter. What kind of development? George Hawkins shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. Behind him, Claire could see more townspeople slowing their pace, openly watching now. This was entertainment, a spectacle. "Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private," George suggested, but he didn't move. Didn't offer an alternative. "Please," Claire's voice came out harder than she intended. "Just tell me." George sighed, the sound of a man who'd drawn the short straw. "Robert got married 3 weeks ago to Lydia Hale. She's a widow, owns property north of town. It was, well, it happened rather suddenly. He meant to send word to stop you from coming, but the timing..." He trailed off as if the logistics of betrayal somehow softened the blow. Clara stood very still. She'd learned in the months after her father's death that if you held yourself carefully enough, you could keep everything from falling apart, at least on the outside. "I see." 2 words. That's all she could manage. "He did intend to honor his commitment," George continued, rushing now, as if speed could somehow make this better. "But then Mrs. Hale, Lydia, she made him an offer, and it made more sense, business-wise. She has resources, connections. It's not personal, Miss Whitmore. It's just business," Clara finished for him. "I understand." But she didn't. She didn't understand how a man could write letters about building a life together, about trust and partnership, and then simply upgrade to a better offer like she was livestock at auction. She didn't understand how she'd traveled 2,000 miles, spent every cent she had, burned every bridge in Boston, only to be told she was the inferior choice. "Robert did ask me to give you this." George reached into his pocket and produced an envelope. "It's money for your return journey and a bit extra. Compensation," he said. Compensation. As if there was a price that could cover humiliation, abandonment, and the complete destruction of the future you'd staked everything on. Clara took the envelope because not taking it would have been stupid, and whatever else she might be, foolish perhaps for believing those letters, she wasn't stupid. Her fingers felt numb. "There's a stage that runs through here twice a week," George continued. "Next one's on Thursday. You can stay at the boarding house until then. It's the building next to the post office, run by Mrs. Brennan. Robert's already arranged. I'm sure he's been very thorough." Clara's voice could have cut glass. George had the decency to wince. "I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore, I truly am. It's not right, what happened, but Robert's made his choice." And there it was, the simple, brutal truth. Robert Fletcher had made his choice, and it wasn't her. Clara became aware of the silence that had fallen over the street. Every conversation had stopped. Every eye was on her. The woman who'd come all this way to be a bride and was now just another piece of frontier debris, disposable and easily forgotten. She thought about crying, thought about screaming, thought about getting back on that stagecoach, except it was already gone, wouldn't be back for days, and she had nowhere else to go anyway. Boston was a closed door. She had no family left, no friends who'd take her in. She'd sold everything, said goodbye to everything. This was supposed to be her new beginning. "Miss Whitmore?" George's voice was gentler now, pitying, and Clara hated it. "Shall I walk you to the boarding house?" Before she could answer, before she could figure out what the hell she was supposed to do next, another voice cut through the thick afternoon air. "That's a hell of a way to welcome a lady to town, George." Clara turned. The voice came from a man leaning against the post outside the general store, one boot propped up on the boardwalk, arms crossed over his chest. He was tall, taller than George, taller than most men she'd seen, with dark hair that needed cutting and a shirt with the sleeves rolled up past his forearms. He wasn't handsome in any conventional sense. His face was too angular, too weathered by sun and work, but there was something arresting about him, something solid. George's expression shifted to annoyance. "This doesn't concern you, Ethan, doesn't it?" The man, Ethan, pushed off from the post and walked toward them with an easy, unhurried gait. "Seems to me a woman just traveled halfway across the country based on a promise, only to find that promise broken. That concerns me. Should concern anybody with a sense of decency." "Robert made a business decision," George said defensively. "He's compensating Miss Whitmore fairly." "Fairly?" Ethan stopped a few feet away, his gaze moving from George to Clara. His eyes were gray, she noticed, storm gray. "What's fair compensation for uprooting your entire life? For being humiliated in front of a town full of strangers? Put a dollar amount on that, George." Clara found herself staring at this stranger who'd just articulated the fury she'd been too shocked to express. Who was he, and why did he care? George's face reddened. "This is Robert's business, Cole, and the lady's, not yours." "Then let's ask the lady." Ethan's attention shifted fully to Clara, and she felt the weight of it, not leering or presumptuous, but direct, unflinching. "Did Robert Fletcher write you letters, make you promises?" "Yes." Clara's voice came out stronger than she expected. "Did he ask you to come here? To upend your life for him?" "Yes." "And did he bother to tell you he was marrying someone else?" Clara's jaw tightened. "No." Ethan nodded slowly, as if she'd just confirmed something he already knew. He turned back to George. "Seems pretty clear who's in the wrong here." "Nobody's saying it's ideal," George started. "Ideal?" Ethan's voice sharpened. "That's your word for this? A man breaks his word, abandons a woman he made promises to, and that's just not ideal?" A small crowd had gathered now, drawn by the confrontation. Clara could see faces in the doorway of the saloon, women paused in their shopping, a couple of ranch hands stopping their horses to watch. She felt exposed, like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding in public. "Ethan, please," George said, lowering his voice. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No, George. Fletcher made this hard when he put his signature on those letters, when he made promises he didn't intend to keep." Ethan glanced back at Clara. "How much is in that envelope?" Clara opened it with trembling fingers. "Bills." She counted quickly. $100. $100? Ethan's laugh was bitter. "That's what Fletcher thinks this is worth. Your reputation, your future, your trust. $100. "It's more than generous," George protested. "It's enough to get her home and then some." "Home?" Ethan seized on the word. "And where's home, Miss Whitmore? Clara Whitmore." She shouldn't be speaking to this stranger, shouldn't be participating in what was rapidly becoming a public spectacle. But something about his anger on her behalf, righteous and clear, made her feel less alone. "Boston. But there's nothing for me there." "Nothing there? And nothing here either," Ethan said quietly, but loud enough for the watching crowd to hear. "That about sum it up?" Clara swallowed hard. "Yes." The silence that followed was heavy. Clara could feel judgment in it, pity, curiosity. She could feel herself becoming a story these people would tell. Remember that mail-order bride who got replaced? Poor thing. Never saw it coming. Ethan Cole, because that's who this had to be, the man George had called by name, looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He took off his hat, held it in both hands like a man standing at a graveside, and spoke with quiet formality. "Miss Whitmore, I apologize for speaking about your circumstances without invitation. That wasn't proper, but I want you to know something." He paused, seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "Fletcher was a damn fool." George made a noise of protest, but Ethan ignored him. "Any man who'd break a promise to a woman brave enough to travel 2,000 miles on faith alone, that's not a man worth mourning. You're well rid of him." Claire felt something crack in her chest. Not break. She'd already broken, was barely holding the pieces together, but crack. Like a dam starting to give way. Thank you, but it doesn't change my situation." "No," Ethan agreed. "It doesn't, but maybe something else can." He put his hat back on and turned to face George directly. "Tell me something. Did Fletcher know about Miss Whitmore's arrival today? George shifted uncomfortably. Of course he knew. And where is he? Why isn't he here himself handling this? He and Lydia, Mrs. Fletcher, left for San Antonio yesterday. Business. Business. Ethan's voice dripped contempt. Convenient. So he asked you to do his dirty work, hand over some money, and ship the problem back east. That about right? That's exactly right, George, and you know it. Ethan looked around at the gathered crowd, his voice carrying. Robert Fletcher made a promise to this woman, put it in writing, asked her to cross the country and build a life with him. Then he married someone else and couldn't even be bothered to face her himself. Is that the kind of man we want representing Dry Creek? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Clara saw a few nods, a few expressions of discomfort, but she also saw the tight lips of women who'd already decided this was somehow her fault, the smirks of men who found the whole thing amusing. George's face was now fully red. Ethan, that's enough. This is between Robert and Miss Whitmore. No. Clara surprised herself by speaking up. Both men turned to look at her. Mr. Cole is right. Mr. Fletcher made me promises. He asked me to trust him, and She had to stop, had to breathe. He didn't have the courage to face me himself. Miss Whitmore, George began, his tone condescending now. I understand you're upset, but you have to be reasonable. Robert is married now. That's done. The best thing, the only thing, is for you to take this money and go home. I told you, Clara said, voice shaking. I have no home. Then find one somewhere else. George's patience was clearly wearing thin. You're a young woman. You can work, find a position somewhere. This money is a gift, more than most people get when things don't work out. When things don't work out, Claire repeated slowly, as if this were a business venture that simply failed to yield returns. As if I were merchandise that didn't meet specifications. Now you're being dramatic, George said, and Clara felt rage bloom in her chest like fire. Dramatic? Her voice rose. I spent every cent I had to come here. I said goodbye to the only city I've ever known. I have no family, no connections, no prospects. Mr. Fletcher promised me a future, and in exchange, I promised him mine. I kept my promise. He broke his. And you're calling me dramatic? Lower your voice, George hissed, glancing at the crowd. You're making a scene. Good. Clara stepped forward, and George actually stepped back. Maybe there should be a scene. Maybe people should know what kind of man Robert Fletcher is. That's enough. George's hand shot out as if to grab her arm, and Clara froze. But his hand never made contact. Ethan Cole had moved between them, fast and fluid, and suddenly George's wrist was caught in his grip. Don't. Ethan's voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made George go still. Don't even think about putting your hands on her. I wasn't. You were. Ethan released George's wrist and stepped back, positioning himself slightly between Clara and the other man. And we're done here. You've delivered Fletcher's message and his blood money. Your job's finished. George looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Ethan's expression must have convinced him otherwise. He straightened his vest, gathered what dignity he had left. Fine, Miss Whitmore, the boarding house is— She heard you the first time, Ethan interrupted. Go! George shot them both a venomous look, then turned and stalked back toward the freight office, muttering under his breath. The crowd, sensing the show was over, began to disperse, though Clara could feel their lingering curiosity, their whispered speculations. She and Ethan Cole stood alone on the street, dust settling around them. Clara's hands were shaking. Now that the adrenaline was fading, the full weight of her situation was crashing down. She was in a strange town, in a territory she didn't know, with exactly $100 and a trunk full of belongings she'd probably have to sell. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. She'd been so careful, so practical. She'd chosen the safest option available to her, the most respectable path, and it had still led here, to public humiliation and absolute uncertainty. Miss Whitmore? Ethan's voice was gentler now. You should sit down. I'm fine. But she wasn't. The world was tilting again, and this time she couldn't steady it. Ethan caught her elbow, carefully, letting her pull away if she wanted, and guided her to a bench outside the general store. Clara sank onto it, grateful for the support. She pressed her hands flat against the rough wood, focusing on the splinters and grain, anything to anchor herself. "Put your head down," Ethan said quietly. "Between your knees. You've gone pale." Clara did as he suggested, too tired to argue. Blood rushed back to her head. The dizziness receded. When she sat up again, Ethan was crouched in front of her, gray eyes level with hers, patient and watchful. "Better?" he asked. "Not really." But she appreciated the honesty of the question. "Mr. Cole?" "Ethan, please." "Ethan." The name felt strange on her tongue. Too familiar, but formality seemed absurd after what had just happened. "Why did you do that?" "Intervene, I mean. You don't know me." He was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider the question seriously. "I suppose because somebody needed to. And because I've seen men break promises before. It doesn't sit well with me." "Still, it wasn't your fight." "Maybe not." He stood, dusted off his knees. "But I've got a low tolerance for men who hide behind proxies when they do wrong. If Fletcher didn't have the spine to face you himself, someone needed to say it out loud." Clara studied him. He was younger than she'd first thought. Maybe 30. His clothes were simple but well made, worn from use rather than poverty. Work clothes. Ranch clothes. His hands were calloused, she noticed. This was a man who made his living with his hands. "You have my gratitude," she said formally, "even if it doesn't change anything." "Actually," Ethan said slowly, "I've been thinking about that. About changing things, I mean." Clara's stomach tightened with suspicion. Here it comes, she thought, the real reason he'd helped. Men didn't intervene out of pure altruism, not for women they didn't know. There was always a price. "What do you mean?" she asked carefully. Ethan seemed to read her wariness. "Nothing untoward, I promise you. Just a possibility. Something that might benefit us both." "I don't understand." He looked down the street toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open land, then back at her. "I have a ranch, about 5 miles west of here. Small operation, cattle mostly, some horses. I run it alone, which is manageable but not ideal. A ranch that size really needs 2 people, a partnership." Claire's heart was beating faster now. "Mr. Cole, hear me out." He held up a hand. "I'm not proposing what Fletcher proposed. I'm not asking you to trust blindness or make promises you can't keep. I'm offering something different, something honest." "Which is?" "A job." He said it plainly. "Room, board, fair wages. Help me run the ranch. If it doesn't work out, you leave with money saved and a reference. If it does," he trailed off, then finished carefully. "If it does, maybe we discuss something more permanent. A real partnership. Marriage." The word hung between them. Clara stared at him. "You're proposing marriage to a complete stranger 5 minutes after watching me get jilted?" "No," Ethan said firmly. "I'm proposing work, employment. The marriage part would only come later, much later, and only if we both wanted it, only if it made sense." "Why?" Clara couldn't keep the suspicion from her voice. "Why would you do this? You don't know anything about me." "I know some things." Ethan counted on his fingers. "I know you're brave enough to travel 2,000 miles on faith. I know you're willing to work for your future. You came here to build a life, not to be kept like a decoration. I know you've got a spine because you stood up to George when most women would have just cried and accepted the money. And I know you've got no other options right now, which means you'll actually consider what I'm saying instead of dismissing it out of hand." It was brutally honest and accurate. "I could be terrible," Clara said. "Lazy, cruel, a terrible cook." "Could be." Ethan's mouth quirked. "That's why I'm suggesting you come for work first, trial period. If you can't do the job or if we can't stand each other, no harm done. You'd have earned money and time to figure out your next step." Clara wanted to say no. Wanted to tell this strange man that she wasn't some charity case, that she'd figure things out on her own. But with what? $100 wouldn't last long. She had no skills beyond basic housekeeping and bookkeeping, and those wouldn't get her far in a territory where women's options were limited to teaching, housekeeping for others, or worse. And there was something else. Something in the way Ethan had stood up for her, not because he wanted something from her, but because it was the right thing to do. in the way he was offering her choice rather than demanding her gratitude. If I said yes, she spoke carefully, what would you expect? Honesty, Ethan said immediately. Hard work. And respect, same as I'd give you. Nothing else. Nothing you don't offer freely. And the marriage part? Would require both of us agreeing, not just me deciding you'd do and presenting you with a fait accompli. That's Fletcher's way, not mine. Clara looked down at the envelope in her hands. $100. That's what her dreams were worth to Robert Fletcher. She looked back up at Ethan Cole. I need time to think. Fair enough. He gestured toward her trunk. Let me take that to the boarding house for you. You can think there, get some rest, have some food. Tomorrow morning, if you're interested, come by my ranch. See it for yourself. If you don't like what you see, no obligation. It was more than fair. It was the first truly fair thing that had happened since she'd stepped off that stagecoach. All right, Clara heard herself say. I'll come see it. Ethan nodded, satisfied. He hoisted her trunk onto his shoulder like it weighed nothing, and it wasn't light, and started toward the boarding house. Clara followed, aware of eyes still watching, whispers still being traded. Let them watch, she thought. Let them whisper. She'd been humiliated, yes, abandoned and replaced. But she wasn't broken. Not yet. The boarding house smelled like lye soap and boiled cabbage. Mrs. Brennan, the proprietor, was a stout woman with suspicious eyes and a mouth that seemed designed for pursing and disapproval. She looked at Clara the way you might look at something tracked in on someone's boot. You're the mail-order bride, she said flatly. Not a question. I'm Clara Whitmore, Clara corrected, lifting her chin. I believe Mr. Fletcher arranged a room? He did, paid for 3 nights. Mrs. Brennan's tone suggested this was more charity than Clara deserved. Rooms upstairs, second door, supper's at 6. Don't be late. Clara followed her directions and found herself in a small room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. It was clean, at least. Sparse, but functional. She sank onto the bed and let herself feel it all. The exhaustion, the humiliation, the bone-deep fear of an uncertain future. She'd been so sure, so carefully certain that marrying Robert Fletcher was the smart choice, the safe choice. But there was no such thing as certainty, she realized now. No such thing as safe. You could plan and prepare and do everything right, and life could still sweep your feet out from under you. The question was, what did you do then? Clara thought about Ethan Cole's offer. It was unconventional, possibly improper. What would people say if she went to work on his ranch, unchaperoned? But then people were already talking. The damage to her reputation was done, and there was something appealing about the directness of his proposal. No false promises, no pretty letters that turned out to be lies. Just work, wages, and the possibility, only the possibility, of something more. It wasn't what she'd expected when she'd boarded that stagecoach in Boston. But maybe, Clara thought, expectations were what had gotten her into this mess in the first place. She didn't sleep well. The bed was harder than she was used to, and the sounds of the town filtered through the thin walls. Horses, voices, the tinny piano from the saloon. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw George Hawkins's uncomfortable face, heard him saying Robert got married like it was a minor inconvenience rather than the complete destruction of her plans. By the time dawn light filtered through the window, Claire was already dressed and had repinned her hair 3 times trying to make it look respectable. Her blue traveling dress was dusty from the journey, and she'd tried to brush it clean with limited success. This was all she had. 1 decent dress, 2 everyday ones, some undergarments, and the few personal items she hadn't been able to bear selling, and $100. She counted it again, laying the bills on the bed. It seemed like a lot and like nothing at the same time. How long would this last? A month? 2? And then what? Stop it, she told herself firmly. 1 decision at a time. First, go see Ethan Cole's ranch. Actually look at what he was offering. Then decide. Downstairs, Mrs. Brennan had laid out a breakfast of bread, butter, and weak coffee. 2 other boarders were already eating, an older man who didn't look up, and a middle-aged woman who looked at Clara with undisguised curiosity. You're the one from yesterday, the woman said, not unkindly, but with the avidity of someone who loved a good story. The bride who wasn't. Clara's hand tightened on her coffee cup. I'm Clara Whitmore. Edith Palmer. The woman gestured at the seat across from her. Sit, sit. Must have been quite a shock. That was one way to put it. Clara sat, took a small bite of bread she didn't want. Robert Fletcher's always been ambitious, Edith continued, clearly warming to her topic. Lydia Hale, well, she's got property and money from her first husband. Made sense from a business standpoint, though it's a shame he didn't handle it better with you. Yes. Clara kept her voice neutral. A shame. Still, you're young. Edith's eyes traveled over Clara assessingly. Pretty enough. You'll find something, maybe not here. Dry Creek's not exactly full of opportunities for unmarried women, but somewhere. Somewhere. That vast, unhelpful word that meant nothing and everywhere at once. Actually, Clara said, I may have a position, working for Mr. Cole. Edith's eyebrows shot up. Ethan Cole? The rancher? Yes, he's offered me employment. Has he now? Edith sat back, and Clara could practically see her mind working. Well, that's interesting. Why interesting? Oh, no reason. But Edith's smile suggested plenty of reasons. Ethan's a good man. Keeps to himself mostly. Been running that ranch alone since his father passed 2 years back. Some have wondered when he'd get around to finding a wife. She paused meaningfully. Guess now we know. It's a job, Clara said firmly. Not a courtship. Of course, of course. Edith's tone suggested she believed otherwise. Still, you'll be out there alone with him. People will talk. People are already talking. Clara met Edith's eyes directly. I don't imagine I can stop them. For a moment, Edith looked almost approving. No, I suppose you can't. Well, good luck to you, Miss Whitmore. You'll need it. Clara finished her bread quickly and escaped back to her room. She needed to decide. Go see the ranch or stay here? And what? Wait for another miracle? Hope someone else would offer her charity? No. She was done waiting, done hoping. She pinned her hat in place, pulled on her gloves, and went downstairs. Outside, the morning sun was already fierce, promising another scorching day. The town was stirring, shopkeepers opening doors, a wagon rumbling past. And there, waiting by a horse tied to the post, was Ethan Cole. He straightened when he saw her, touched his hat. Morning, Miss Whitmore. Wasn't sure you'd come. I said I would. So you did. He gestured to the horse. She's gentle. Do you ride? Clara looked at the animal, a bay mare with kind eyes. I haven't. Not really. All right. Then you'll ride with me. Ethan swung into the saddle with easy grace, then reached down. Give me your hand. Clara hesitated, but there was no judgment in his face, no impatience, just practicality. She took his hand. His grip was warm and calloused, and let him pull her up behind him. Hold on, he said simply, and Clara wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt. Then they were moving, and Dry Creek was falling behind them, and Clara was riding toward something unknown with a man she'd met yesterday. It should have terrified her. Instead, for the first time since stepping off that stagecoach, Clara felt something that might have been hope. The landscape opened up before them like a promise written in earth and sky. Clara had expected more of the same dust and scrub she'd seen from the stagecoach, but as they rode west from Dry Creek, the land began to reveal itself in layers. Rolling hills covered in buffalo grass that swayed silver gold in the morning breeze, clusters of mesquite trees casting pools of shade. In the distance, she could see the dark line of what might have been a river, and beyond that, the hazy blue outline of hills that seemed to go on forever. It was vast, overwhelming, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with the manicured gardens and brick buildings of Boston. This was beauty that didn't care whether you noticed it or not. It simply existed, indifferent and eternal. Ethan guided the horse with subtle shifts of his weight, one hand loose on the reins. Clara could feel the muscles in his back move as he rode, could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing. She'd never been this close to a man who wasn't family, and the intimacy of it, necessary but strange, made her hyper-aware of every point of contact. You doing all right back there? Ethan's voice carried over the sound of hoofbeats. Yes. Clara loosened her grip slightly, realizing she'd been holding on like she expected to fall at any moment. How much farther? Another mile or so. You can see the boundary fence up ahead. See where the land dips down? That's where my property starts. Clara followed his gesture and saw the wooden posts marking the border between open range and claimed land. It looked like a line drawn between wilderness and intention, between what was and what could be. They rode through a gate that Ethan leaned down to unlatch without dismounting, and suddenly they were on his land. Clara noticed the difference immediately. The fences were in good repair, the paths worn by regular use, the grass showing signs of managed grazing rather than random wandering. This was land someone cared for. That's the north pasture, Ethan pointed as they rode. Keep about 50 head of cattle there most of the year. South pasture's smaller, better for calving. Got a smaller enclosure for horses. I breed them when I can, though it's not the main income. He spoke matter-of-factly, but Clara could hear the pride underneath. This was his work. His life. They crested a small rise and Clara saw the house. It wasn't large, a single-story structure made of wood and stone with a wide porch running along the front. But it was solid, well-built, with glass windows that caught the morning sun and a stone chimney rising from one end. Near it stood a barn, a smaller outbuilding that might have been a smokehouse, and a corral where several horses stood with their heads hanging over the fence, watching their approach with mild interest. That's it, Ethan said simply. Home. He reined in by the porch and dismounted, then reached up to help Clara down. His hands encircled her waist, proper, impersonal, and he set her gently on the ground before stepping back immediately, giving her space. Clara stood there, looking at the house, the land around it, trying to imagine herself here, trying to picture waking up to this view every morning, working this land, building a life in this place that was so far from everything she'd known. Come on, Ethan said, tying the horse to the porch rail. I'll show you inside. The house was dim and cool after the bright morning sun. Clara's eyes adjusted slowly, taking in the main room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all in one. It was spare but clean. A table with 4 chairs, a cast-iron stove, shelves holding dishes and supplies, a comfortable-looking chair near the fireplace with a lamp beside it. No curtains on the windows. No decorative touches. It was a house built for function, not beauty. There are 2 bedrooms, Ethan said, gesturing to doors on opposite sides of the main room. Mine's there. The other one was my father's. It's empty now. If you stay, it'd be yours. Clara walked to the door he'd indicated and looked inside. A simple room with a bed frame, a chest of drawers, and a window looking east. Empty, as he'd said, but the floor was swept and the window was clean. Someone had kept it ready. You've been expecting someone? She asked. No. Ethan leaned against the doorframe. But I keep it clean anyway. Seemed like the thing to do. Clara turned back to the main room, taking it all in with a more practical eye now. The stove looked serviceable but old. The floors needed scrubbing. The windows could use better covering, but the bones of it were good. Solid walls, a good roof, everything straight and square. This was a house that would keep you safe from the elements, if nothing else. What would you expect from me? She asked. Specifically, Ethan seemed to appreciate the directness. Cooking, cleaning, the usual household work, but also help with the ranch. I need someone who can keep the books, handle the supply orders, maybe help with the garden I've been meaning to start. When we move cattle or work the horses, I'd need an extra set of hands, someone who can think on their feet and isn't afraid of hard work. I can do books, Clara said slowly. I helped my father with his accounts before he died, and I can manage a household. I did that for years, but ranch work, she gestured helplessly. I've never done anything like that. I'd teach you. Ethan pushed off from the doorframe and walked to the window, looking out at his land. Wouldn't expect you to know it already, but you'd need to be willing to learn, willing to get your hands dirty and your back sore. This isn't a life for someone who wants to stay clean and comfortable. Clara thought about her life in Boston. The careful respectability, the constant effort to maintain appearances even as her father's debts mounted and the money ran out. The endless social calculus of who owed what to whom, Who was worth cultivating? Who would look down on her for wearing last season's dress? Clean and comfortable sounds overrated, she said. Ethan turned from the window, and something that might have been a smile touched his mouth. You say that now. Wait until you've mucked out a stable in August heat. When would I start? Are you saying yes? Clara realized she was. Somewhere between the ride here and seeing the house, between Ethan's straightforward description of the work and the quiet competence evident in everything around them, she'd made her decision. What other choice did she have, really? But more than that, what better choice? I'm saying I'll try it, she clarified. The trial period you mentioned, if it doesn't work, then you leave with wages earned and no hard feelings. Ethan crossed his arms, studying her. But I should be clear about something, Miss Whitmore. If you stay here, if you work with me, people in town will talk. They already are, I'd imagine. Some will assume things that aren't true. Some will say unkind things. Are you prepared for that? People were already saying unkind things yesterday, Clara pointed out. At least this way I'll have a roof over my head and a purpose while they're saying them. Fair point. Ethan nodded slowly. All right then. Here's what I propose. You move in today. We'll draw up an agreement. I'll pay you $30 a month plus room and board. That's fair wages for this kind of work. After 3 months, we both decide if it's working. If it is, we continue. If not, you'll have $90 saved plus what Fletcher gave you, enough to make a real decision about your future. $30 a month. Clara did the mathematics quickly. That was more than she'd expected, more than most women could earn doing anything respectable. In 3 months, she'd have enough money to go anywhere, do almost anything. The knowledge settled something in her chest, the desperate fear that had been clawing at her since George Hawkins delivered his news. She had options. Maybe not the ones she'd imagined, but options nonetheless. What about the other part? She asked. The possibility you mentioned, of something more permanent. Ethan's expression grew more serious. That depends on those 3 months, on whether we can work together, whether we can trust each other, whether, he paused, choosing his words carefully, whether we find we want more than just a business arrangement. But I won't rush that, Miss Whitmore. Won't push for it. Any decision about marriage would be mutual, considered, and honest, not because either of us is desperate or has no other choice. It was, Claire realized, exactly the opposite of what Robert Fletcher had done. Fletcher had asked for her trust while keeping secrets. Ethan was offering her complete transparency and the freedom to choose. Then yes, she said firmly. I'll stay. We'll try this. All right then. Ethan extended his hand, and after a moment Clara shook it. His grip was firm, his palm calloused against hers. It felt like sealing something real and binding. We'll need to go back to town. Get your things from the boarding house. And we should probably draw up that agreement in writing, have it witnessed, make everything legal and proper. Will that help? Clara asked. With the talk, I mean? Some. Ethan released her hand. Shows we're serious about this being a job, not something improper. Won't stop all the gossip, but it might blunt the worst of it. They rode back to Dry Creek with Clara feeling oddly lighter despite the uncertainty ahead. The sun was higher now, the day heating up, but the movement of the horse created enough breeze to make it bearable. When they reached town, Ethan helped her down outside the boarding house. I'll go find someone to witness the agreement, he said. Maybe Pastor Williams? He's got authority and people respect him. Meet you back here in an hour? Clara nodded and went inside to pack her trunk. It didn't take long. She didn't have much. Mrs. Brennan appeared in the doorway as Clara was latching the lid. Leaving already? The older woman's tone suggested she'd expected as much. Guess you're taking up with Ethan Cole after all. I'm going to work for him, Clara corrected, straightening. He needs help with his ranch. I'm sure he does. Mrs. Brennan's expression was sour. Needs all kinds of help, I imagine. Clara felt anger flash through her, hot and clarifying. She was so tired of people's assumptions, their judgments, their absolute certainty that they knew her story better than she did. Mrs. Brennan, she said quietly, I arrived in this town yesterday expecting to marry a man who'd made me promises. Instead, I found out he'd married someone else and didn't even have the courage to tell me himself. Now I'm making the best of a bad situation. If that offends your sensibilities, I'm sorry. but I'm not going to apologize for surviving. Mrs. Brennan's mouth opened, then closed. For once, she seemed to have nothing to say. Clara picked up her trunk. It was heavy, but she managed and carried it downstairs. Ethan was waiting outside with Pastor Williams, a thin man with kind eyes and a serious expression. They spent the next 30 minutes in the pastor's small office, drafting an agreement that spelled out Clara's duties, her wages, and the terms of her employment. Pastor Williams asked her twice if she was entering into this arrangement of her own free will, if she understood the terms, if she felt pressured in any way. Both times, Clara answered clearly, "Yes, I understand. Yes, I'm choosing this. And no, I don't feel pressured." When she and Ethan both signed the document and Pastor Williams witnessed it, Clara felt something shift. This was real now. Legal. A contract she'd entered into with her eyes open and her mind clear. They stopped at the general store for supplies. Clara would need work clothes, Ethan explained, not the dresses she'd brought from Boston. The store owner, a weathered man named Mr. Parsons, looked at them curiously but took their money without comment. Clara ended up with 2 split skirts suitable for riding and ranch work, 3 practical blouses, a wide-brimmed hat, and a pair of sturdy boots. "Those dresses you have will be fine for Sunday," Ethan said as they loaded the packages. "But you'll want these for daily work, trust me." At the mercantile, they bought flour, sugar, coffee, dried beans, salt pork, and other staples. Ethan let Clara make the selections, following her lead when she chose items she thought would be useful. It felt strange, shopping as if they were already a household, already a partnership. But Clara found she didn't mind the strangeness. There was something almost comforting about the normalcy of it, the mundane decisions about how much coffee to buy, whether they needed more lamp oil. By the time they rode back to the ranch, the sun was past its zenith and Clara's stomach was growling. They'd missed lunch entirely. Ethan carried her trunk inside while Clara unpacked the groceries, already beginning to memorize where things belonged in this kitchen that would be hers to manage. "I should probably make something to eat," she said, surveying the supplies. "I'll handle the horses first, then I'll help you." Ethan headed back outside, and Clara was left alone in the house. Her house now, for at least 3 months. She walked through it again, this time imagining it not as a stranger might see it, but as someone who lived here. The main room could use curtains. She could make those, probably, from fabric bought at the mercantile. The floor needed regular sweeping with this much dust blowing in. She'd need to establish routines, figure out the most efficient way to manage the work. In what would be her bedroom, Clara unpacked her trunk with methodical care. Her few dresses went in the chest of drawers. Her mother's locket, the only piece of jewelry she'd kept, went on top of the dresser where she could see it. The photograph of her father, stiff and formal in his Sunday suit, went beside it. "This is where we are now, Papa," she whispered to the image. "I hope I'm doing the right thing." Her father stared back, frozen in time, offering no answers. When Ethan came back in, Clara had managed to get the stove going. It was similar enough to the one she'd used in Boston and had water heating for coffee. She'd found bread in the pantry and was slicing it when he appeared. "Smells good," he said, washing his hands at the basin. "You found everything all right?" "Most of it. I'll need you to show me where you keep some things, and we'll need to talk about what you like to eat, what your routines are." They worked together to put together a simple meal of bread, cheese, and the last of what looked like yesterday's stew reheated on the stove. It was strange eating together at that table, making small talk about supplies and schedules, and the work that would need doing in the next few days. Strange, but not unpleasant. "Tomorrow I'll start teaching you the ranch work," Ethan said, mopping up stew with his bread. "Basic things first, how to handle the horses, how to check the fences, what to watch for with the cattle. Some of it's seasonal work, but there's always something that needs doing." "And the books?" Clara asked. "You mentioned keeping accounts." "Those are in my father's old desk, your room, actually. I've been managing them, but barely. Not my strong suit. If you've got a head for numbers, that'd be a real help." After they'd eaten and cleaned up, a process that involved negotiating who did what, since Ethan clearly wasn't used to having help, Clara retrieved the ledgers from the desk in her room. They were a mess. Ethan had tried, she could see that, but his entries were sporadic, his handwriting barely legible in places, and his arithmetic was questionable at best. "This is going to take some work," she said, flipping through pages. Told you it wasn't my strength. Ethan looked almost embarrassed. I keep track in my head mostly, but that doesn't help when it comes to filing claims or dealing with banks. I can fix this. Clara was already making mental notes. But I'll need you to tell me everything you remember. Purchases, sales, expenditures. We'll have to reconstruct the past few months. They spent the next 2 hours doing exactly that, with Ethan recounting from memory what he'd bought and sold and spent, and Clara recording it all in neat, organized columns. By the time the sun was setting, painting the room in orange and gold, she had the beginnings of a coherent accounting system. "You're good at this," Ethan observed, watching her work. "My father was a clerk," Clara explained, not looking up from the ledger. "He taught me young, said every woman should understand money, even if society pretended otherwise." "Smart man." "He was." Clara closed the ledger carefully. "Not smart enough to avoid dying in debt, but smart in other ways." The light was fading fast now, and Ethan lit the lamps. The warm glow filled the house, making it feel smaller, more intimate. Clara was suddenly very aware that they were alone here, miles from town, with only each other for company. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, she felt oddly calm. "I should turn in," she said, standing. "Tomorrow sounds like it'll be a long day." "They're all long days." But Ethan smiled slightly. "You'll get used to it. Good night, Miss Whitmore." "Clara," she said it impulsively. "If we're going to be working together every day, you should call me Clara." He considered this, then nodded. "Clara, then. Good night." "Good night, Ethan." In her room, Clara changed into her nightgown and sat on the bed she'd made with sheets from the trunk. The mattress was thin but adequate. Through the window, she could see stars emerging in the darkening sky. More stars than she'd ever seen in Boston, where city lights dimmed the heavens. Out here, they blazed. She thought about Robert Fletcher, wondered briefly where he was, what he was doing with his new wife. Then she pushed the thought away. Fletcher was the past. This strange new arrangement, this ranch, this man who'd offered her honesty instead of pretty lies. This was her present, and maybe, if she worked hard and was lucky, it could be her future too. Clara woke to pale pre-dawn light and the sound of Ethan moving around in the main room. She dressed quickly in one of her new split skirts and blouses, braided her hair practically instead of arranging it in the elaborate style she'd worn in Boston, and emerged to find Ethan already making coffee. "Morning," he said. "You're up early." Farm hours, I remember. Clara had spent summers as a girl with her aunt in the countryside. She remembered that life started before the sun. "What needs doing first?" "Breakfast, then I'll show you how to feed the horses and chickens. Didn't show you the chicken coop yesterday, but it's behind the barn. After that, we'll check the cattle, ride the fence line, see how you handle being in the saddle for a few hours." The morning unfolded in a series of lessons. Ethan was a patient teacher, showing her how to measure out feed for the horses, how to collect eggs without agitating the hens, how to check water troughs and make sure they weren't fouled. Clara listened carefully, asked questions when she didn't understand, and tried not to show how overwhelmed she felt by the sheer amount there was to learn. After a quick breakfast, Ethan saddled 2 horses, the gentle bay mare, Daisy, for Clara, and a larger gelding for himself. He showed Clara how to mount, how to hold the reins, how to use her legs and weight to communicate with the horse. "She's responsive," he said, watching Clara settle into the saddle. "Just be gentle and confident. Horses can tell when you're afraid." Clara took a breath and tried to project confidence she didn't entirely feel, but Daisy was patient with her inexperience, and within a few minutes, Clara found a rhythm. It wasn't graceful, but it was functional. They rode out to the south pasture where the cattle grazed. Ethan showed her how to count them, how to watch for signs of illness or injury, how to spot a break in the fence line before it became a problem. The work was methodical, requiring attention and observation more than any special skill. "You're doing well," Ethan said as they completed the circuit. The sun was high now, the heat building. Clara could feel sweat trickling down her back, her thighs aching from the unaccustomed exercise. "I'm exhausted," she admitted. "That's normal. First few days are always the hardest. Your body will adjust." He gestured back toward the house. "Come on, we'll have lunch, then you can rest while I handle some repairs in the barn." But when they got back, they found a horse tied to the porch rail. A fine horse, Clara noticed, with expensive tack. Not a working animal. Ethan's expression tightened. Company. They'd barely dismounted when the door opened and a woman stepped out. She was perhaps 35, handsome rather than beautiful, wearing a riding habit that probably cost more than everything Clara owned. Her hair was perfectly arranged, her posture that of someone used to being obeyed. This, Clara realized with a sinking feeling, must be Lydia Hale. No, Lydia Fletcher now. Ethan, the woman's voice was cultured with just a hint of the South in it. I hope you don't mind, the door was unlocked. Mrs. Fletcher. Ethan's tone was scrupulously polite. Cold. What brings you out here? Lydia's eyes moved from Ethan to Clara, assessing. I came to meet your new employee. I heard all about it in town. How gallant of you, Ethan, taking in Robert's cast-off. The words hit like a slap. Clara felt her face heat, but before she could respond, Ethan stepped forward. Miss Whitmore is my business partner, not a charity case. And she's not Robert's anything. He forfeited any claim when he broke his promises. Of course, Lydia's smile didn't reach her eyes. Still, it must be difficult for you, dear. This directed at Clara. Coming all this way only to find yourself replaced. By me, as it happens. Clara found her voice. You have my congratulations on your marriage, Mrs. Fletcher. I hope you and your husband will be very happy. Oh, we will be. Lydia moved closer, and Clara caught the scent of expensive perfume. Robert made the right choice, you see. I can offer him things, connections, resources, status, that someone like you simply couldn't. Nothing personal, you understand, just reality. I understand perfectly, Clara said quietly. You can offer him money. I would have offered him loyalty and honesty. Apparently, he valued the former more. Lydia's expression sharpened. You have spirit, I'll give you that. Unfortunate that spirit doesn't pay bills or secure futures, but perhaps Ethan here appreciates that sort of thing. Her gaze flicked to Ethan with something that looked like calculation. Or perhaps he's just being practical. Ranch this size needs a woman's work. If you've said what you came to say, Mrs. Fletcher, you can leave now. Ethan's voice had gone dangerously soft. Actually, I came with an offer. Lydia pulled a folded paper from her pocket. Robert and I are expanding. We need household help. I'm prepared to offer Miss Whitmore a position. Good wages, room and board, perfectly respectable work. She'd be much better off than staying out here, working herself to death on a struggling ranch. She held out the paper to Clara. A job offer. Household servant in the Fletcher residence. Clara looked at it for a long moment. She thought about taking it, about the security it might represent. Then she thought about serving meals to Robert Fletcher and his new wife, about being a daily reminder of his betrayal and her humiliation, about existing on the periphery of the life she'd been promised. No, she said simply. No? Lydia's eyebrows rose. Just like that? Just like that. Clara met her gaze steadily. I have employment, Mrs. Fletcher. Employment I chose freely. I'm not interested in your offer. You're turning down good money and respectable work to stay out here and, what, pretend to be a rancher? Play house with Ethan? Lydia's voice took on an edge. Be sensible. This arrangement is temporary at best. What happens when Ethan tires of you, when the novelty wears off? That's enough. Ethan's voice cracked like a whip. You've made your offer and Miss Whitmore has declined. Time for you to leave. Lydia's expression hardened. You're making a mistake, both of you. People in town are already talking. This little arrangement of yours, it's scandalous. Miss Whitmore will be ruined, and you, Ethan, will be a laughingstock. All because you wanted to play the hero. Or maybe, Clara said, surprised by her own boldness, all because someone finally treated me with honesty and respect. Novel concepts, I realize, but I'll take them over whatever you're offering. For a moment, Lydia looked genuinely angry. Then her expression smoothed into something practiced and cold. Very well, but don't come crying to me when this all falls apart. And it will, Miss Whitmore. These things always do. She swept past them, mounted her horse with practiced ease, and rode off without looking back. Clara and Ethan stood in silence until the sound of hoofbeats faded. Then Clara's legs seemed to give out, and she sat down hard on the porch steps. That woman, she said, voice shaking, is absolutely insufferable. To her surprise, Ethan laughed. It was a genuine laugh, warm and unexpected. That's one word for her. I can think of several others. She came all the way out here just to be cruel, Clara said. Why would she do that? Ethan sat down beside her, his shoulder nearly touching hers. Because you're a threat. A threat? To what? To the story she wants to tell. In her version, she's the prize Robert won. But your existence, you being here, making a life without him, that complicates the narrative. Makes it look less like he won and more like he traded honor for money. Claire considered this. So, this was about making sure I knew my place. Making sure I felt diminished. Yes, and you didn't let her. Ethan glanced at her, something approving in his expression. You stood your ground. That took courage. Or stupidity, Claire said. I just turned down paying work to continue an arrangement that might not last 3 months. Do you regret it? Did she? Clara thought about serving tea to Lydia Fletcher, about watching Robert pretend she didn't exist, about living in the house of broken promises. Then she thought about the morning she'd just spent, learning, working, building something with her own hands. No, she said finally. I don't regret it. Good. Ethan stood, offered her his hand. Come on, let's have that lunch. Then you can rest while I work, and tonight we'll go over more of those books. We've got a life to build here, Clara. Let's not waste time on people like Lydia Fletcher. Clara took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. As they walked into the house together, she realized something had shifted. This wasn't just about survival anymore, about making the best of a bad situation. This was about choosing, about building, about proving that she was more than what Robert Fletcher had made her feel, more than a cast-off, more than a charity case, more than someone's second choice. She was Clara Whitmore, and she was going to make something of this chance she'd been given, even if it scared her half to death. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that Clara found simultaneously exhausting and exhilarating. She woke before dawn, her body slowly adjusting to the demands of ranch life, and fell into bed each night with muscles aching in places she hadn't known existed. But with each passing day, the work became slightly less foreign, slightly more instinctive. Ethan kept his word about teaching her. He showed her how to repair fence posts, how to spot a lame horse before the injury worsened, how to read the sky for coming weather. He taught her to rope, though her first attempts were clumsy enough to make even the horses look amused, and how to predict where cattle would move based on wind and water. The work was harder than anything Clara had done in Boston, where her days had been filled with social calls and needlework and the carefully orchestrated dance of maintaining respectability on a shrinking budget. This was real, tangible. At the end of each day, Clara could point to things she'd accomplished: fences mended, accounts balanced, meals prepared, animals tended. There was something deeply satisfying about work that left visible results. But the social cost was exactly what Lydia Fletcher had predicted. When Clara accompanied Ethan to town for supplies 2 weeks after moving to the ranch, the reception was decidedly cool. Women who might have offered sympathy to an abandoned bride now viewed her with suspicion and thinly veiled judgment. Men looked at her with a speculation that made her skin crawl. The unspoken question hung in the air everywhere they went. What exactly was the nature of Clara's arrangement with Ethan Cole? Don't let it bother you, Ethan said quietly as they loaded supplies into the wagon. He'd noticed her discomfort, the way she held herself rigid under the weight of watching eyes. People always need something to talk about. Give them a month and they'll move on to some other scandal. But Clara wasn't so sure. The looks she received weren't idle curiosity. They were condemnation. She'd become something shameful in the eyes of Dry Creek, something that existed outside the bounds of respectability. The only person who treated her with any kindness was Pastor Williams, who stopped them outside the mercantile. Miss Whitmore, Mr. Cole, he tipped his hat. How are you both faring? Well enough, Pastor, Ethan replied. Ranch is keeping us busy. I'm sure it is. Pastor Williams' gaze was shrewd but not unkind. I've heard some talk in town, people making assumptions. I want you both to know that I've been reminding folks about the agreement you signed, about the proper nature of your arrangement. Some listen, some, he shrugged, some prefer their own narratives. We appreciate that, Pastor, Clara said quietly, though I suspect we're fighting a losing battle. Perhaps, But the truth has a way of asserting itself, given time. He paused, then added, "You're both welcome at Sunday services, if you'd like to attend. Might help to be seen in the community, to show you're not hiding." After he'd moved on, Ethan glanced at Clara. "Do you want to go? To church, I mean?" Clara thought about sitting in a pew with dozens of people staring at her, whispering behind their hands. The prospect was deeply unappealing, but Pastor Williams had a point. Hiding would only feed the gossip. "Yes," she said finally, "we should go." Sunday came too quickly. Clara wore her best dress, the blue wool she'd arrived in, carefully cleaned and pressed. She arranged her hair with more care than she'd taken since moving to the ranch, trying to project an image of respectability even if the town had already decided otherwise. Ethan appeared in a suit that looked slightly too tight across the shoulders, his hair slicked back with water. He looked uncomfortable but determined. "Ready?" he asked. "No, but let's go anyway." The ride to town was silent, both of them bracing for what was coming. When they arrived at the small church, people were already gathering outside, chatting in clusters before the service. Conversations stopped as Clara and Ethan approached. Heads turned, whispers started. Clara lifted her chin and walked forward as if she had every right to be there. Because she did. She'd done nothing wrong except survive an impossible situation with what dignity she could muster. Inside, they found a pew near the back. Clara was hyper-aware of the space between her and Ethan. Proper, respectable, exactly the distance that should exist between an employer and employee. But she could feel eyes on them, could sense the calculations being made. The service was interminable. Clara barely heard Pastor Williams's sermon, too focused on maintaining her composure. When it finally ended and people began filing out, she hoped they could escape quickly. But Lydia Fletcher had other plans. "Miss Whitmore." Lydia's voice carried across the churchyard. She stood with Robert at her side, both of them dressed in expensive clothes that marked them as people of means. "How domestic you look. Ranch life must agree with you." There was no avoiding this confrontation, not with half the town watching. Clara forced herself to turn, to face the man who'd abandoned her and the woman who'd taken her place. Robert Fletcher looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting between Clara and some point over her shoulder. He was handsome enough, she supposed, brown hair, neat features, the kind of face that photographs well. But there was weakness in it too, in the way he couldn't quite meet her gaze. "Mrs. Fletcher?" Clara said evenly. "Mr. Fletcher. Good morning." "We were just discussing you," Lydia continued, her smile sharp. "Robert feels quite guilty about how things turned out. Don't you, darling?" Robert's face reddened. "Lydia, perhaps this isn't the time, but—" "Nonsense. It's the perfect time." "Well," Lydia's eyes glittered with malice. "We're all adults here. We can discuss the situation honestly. Robert made a business decision, Miss Whitmore found alternative employment, and everyone's moving forward. No hard feelings." "None at all," Clara lied. In truth, she felt a complicated tangle of anger and hurt, and something almost like pity when she looked at Robert. He'd traded honor for profit, and now he was married to a woman who wielded him like a weapon. "Though I must say," Lydia continued, "I'm surprised you're still at the coal ranch. I'd have thought the isolation would wear on you by now. Or perhaps—" She let the implication hang in the air, ugly and unmistakable. "Perhaps what?" Clara heard herself say. She was done playing nice, done pretending this woman's barbs didn't land. "Perhaps the arrangement is more comfortable than you initially let on." Lydia's smile widened. A young woman, alone with a man, miles from town. One does wonder about the nature of such comfort. The churchyard had gone very quiet. This was it. The accusation Clara had known was coming, spoken aloud where everyone could hear. Before Clara could respond, Ethan stepped forward. His voice was calm but carried an edge that made several people flinch. "Mrs. Fletcher, you're suggesting something improper about an arrangement you know nothing about. Miss Whitmore and I have a legal employment contract witnessed by Pastor Williams himself. She keeps my books, helps run the household, and assists with ranch work. That's all. If you're implying otherwise, you're not just gossiping, you're slandering." "I'm simply stating what everyone's thinking," Lydia said, unfazed. "An unmarried woman living with an unmarried man. It's scandalous, Ethan. You have to see that." What I see, Ethan replied, is a woman who found herself abandoned and chose to work for her living rather than accept charity or make a bad marriage out of desperation. What's scandalous is how you're treating someone who's done nothing wrong except have the misfortune of trusting your husband's promises. Robert made a strangled noise. Now see here, Cole. No, you see here, Fletcher. Ethan turned on him, and Clara watched Robert actually take a step back. You wrote those letters. You made those promises. You asked Clara to uproot her entire life and come here. Then you married someone else and didn't even have the spine to tell her yourself. You don't get to stand there now, hiding behind your wife's skirts, acting affronted. How dare you, Lydia began, but Pastor Williams chose that moment to intervene. That's enough, all of you. He stepped between the two groups, his expression stern. This is a house of worship, not a place for public arguments. Mrs. Fletcher, Mr. Fletcher, perhaps you should move along. Miss Whitmore, Mr. Cole, a word, please. The Fletchers left with poor grace, Lydia shooting Clara a look of pure venom. When they were gone, Pastor Williams turned to Clara and Ethan. I'm sorry you had to endure that, he said quietly. Mrs. Fletcher has been vocal about her opinions regarding your situation. She's been spreading rumors, Clara said flatly. Yes, Pastor Williams didn't deny it. I've tried to counter them, but she has resources and connections I don't. The truth is, Miss Whitmore, your position is precarious. People are making assumptions. Some genuinely believe you're in a compromising situation. Others, he hesitated. Others simply enjoy having something to gossip about. What do you suggest? Ethan asked. Pastor Williams looked between them carefully. That depends on what your intentions are. If this truly is temporary employment, if you plan to part ways when the contract ends, then perhaps the best course is to endure the gossip until it fades. But if you're considering something more permanent, he let the sentence trail off meaningfully. Clara's heart hammered. They hadn't discussed marriage since that first day, hadn't talked about anything beyond the immediate work of running the ranch. It had felt too soon, too fraught. But now, standing in the churchyard with the weight of the town's judgment pressing down, Clara realized they couldn't avoid the question forever. We haven't decided, Ethan said carefully. It's only been a few weeks. I understand, but I'd urge you to decide sooner rather than later, for Miss Whitmore's sake, if nothing else. The longer this arrangement continues without resolution, the more damage it does to her reputation. And reputation, once lost, is nearly impossible to recover. They rode back to the ranch in heavy silence. Clara stared at the landscape rolling past, thinking about reputation and damage and impossible choices. She'd come to Texas to marry Robert Fletcher because it was respectable, safe, the right thing to do. And look where that had gotten her. Now she was doing something that wasn't respectable by any measure, and yet it felt more honest than anything she'd done in Boston. She worked hard, contributed meaningfully, made decisions about her own life. The fact that society condemned her for it seemed increasingly absurd. I'm sorry, Ethan said finally. They were almost home, the ranch buildings visible in the distance. I should have anticipated this, should have protected you better. How? Clara asked. By not offering me work? By leaving me stranded in town with no options? By marrying you immediately before the gossip could start? He said it matter-of-factly, like discussing any practical solution to a problem. That's what people expected, what they would have accepted. A marriage of convenience, you mean, like what I almost had with Fletcher. No. Ethan pulled the horse to a stop, turned to look at her directly. Not like that at all. Fletcher lied to you, made promises he didn't keep. I'd have been honest from the start about what the marriage was and wasn't. A partnership, a practical arrangement, nothing hidden. Clara studied his face, trying to read what lay behind those words. But you didn't suggest it. No, because I wanted you to have a choice, wanted you to have time to decide what you actually wanted, not just accept the first offer that came along. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But it seems I miscalculated. I thought giving you freedom would be better than rushing into marriage. I didn't fully consider the social cost. And now? Now I'm asking what you want, Clara. Do you want to continue as we are, weathers the gossip and hope it dies down? Do you want to end the arrangement, try to find something else, or... He took a breath. Or do we make this a real marriage? Not just on paper, but a genuine partnership. No lies, no illusions, just two people choosing to build a life together. Clara's pulse raced. This was it. The question that had been hovering between them since that first day. But now it wasn't abstract. Now it was real, immediate, weighted with consequences. I need time to think, she said. Of course. Ethan urged the horse forward again. Take all the time you need. This isn't a decision to be rushed. But when they reached the ranch, when Clara dismounted and looked at the house that had become her home, she realized she'd already been thinking about this. Every day for the past 3 weeks, she'd been testing this life, trying it on like a dress to see if it fit. And the truth was, it did fit, better than anything she'd worn in Boston. The question wasn't whether she could build a life here. The question was whether she and Ethan could build one together. That night, after supper, they sat at the table with the ledgers spread between them, their usual evening routine. But the work felt perfunctory, both of them distracted by unspoken questions. Finally, Clara set down her pen. Tell me something. Why did you really offer me this arrangement? And don't say it was just because you needed help with the ranch. You could have hired anyone for that. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his finger tracing the grain of the wooden table. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. You want the truth? Always. I saw something in you that day. Standing there in the street, being told your future had been taken away, and you didn't collapse. Didn't cry or beg. You were angry, yes, but you were strong, dignified. And I thought... He paused, seeming to weigh his words. I thought that kind of strength was rare, worth preserving, worth partnering with. So it was pity? No. He looked up sharply. Not pity. Respect. There's a difference. I didn't feel sorry for you, Clara. I felt recognition. Like I was seeing someone who understood that life doesn't give you what you expect, and the only choice is to adapt or break. You chose to adapt. Clara felt something shift in her chest. And the marriage? If we did that, what would you expect from it? Honesty, partnership, shared work, and shared decisions. Someone I could trust to run this ranch with me, not just live in the house while I do all the real work. He met her eyes. And eventually, if we both wanted it, maybe more than that, affection, companionship. But I wouldn't demand it, wouldn't expect you to pretend feelings you didn't have. That's a very practical view of marriage. I've seen what happens when people marry for passion and it burns out. My parents did that. Loved each other desperately for 10 years, then spent the next 20 making each other miserable. I watched it destroy them both. His jaw tightened. I'd rather build something on respect and compatibility. Let affection grow if it's going to grow, but not stake everything on it from the start. Clara understood that. Her own parents had married for love, and after her father's death, her mother had been so devastated she'd barely functioned, leaving Clara to manage everything at 16. Love could be beautiful, but it could also be crippling. What about children? She asked. Would you want them? Someday, if it happened. But I wouldn't pressure you about it. That would be your choice as much as mine. Clara stood, walked to the window. Outside, the moon was rising over the hills, painting everything in silver and shadow. She could see the barn, the fences, the land stretching away into darkness. This place, this life, this man who'd offered her something no one else had, choice, respect, honesty. I need to visit my room for a moment, she said. Will you wait here? Ethan nodded, confused but patient. In her room, Clara opened the chest of drawers and pulled out the envelope George Hawkins had given her. $100. Robert Fletcher's payment for her humiliation. She'd been saving it, keeping it as insurance against the day this arrangement might fall apart. But looking at it now, she realized it represented the past, a past she needed to let go of. She returned to the main room and placed the envelope on the table in front of Ethan. If we marry, she said, I want to contribute this to the ranch. Not as your money, but as mine. I want to be a real partner, Ethan. That means investing in our future, not keeping an escape fund hidden away. Ethan stared at the envelope, then at her. Clara, you don't have to do this. That money is yours. I know. That's why I'm choosing to invest it. In us. In this place. She sat down across from him. But I have conditions. Name them. First, I want equal say in ranch decisions, not just the household, but the business. You teach me, I learn, and then we decide things together. Agreed. Second, if I'm managing the accounts, I want my name on the bank documents. Legal authority to conduct business on behalf of the ranch. Ethan's eyebrows rose. That was unusual. Most men would never grant their wives that kind of power. But after a moment, he nodded. Makes sense. You'll be doing the work. You should have the authority. What else? Third, if this doesn't work, if we marry and it turns out we can't stand each other, I want your word that you'll let me leave. No trying to control me or keep me trapped. I'll forfeit the money I put in, but I get to leave with my freedom intact. You have my word, though I'd hope if we reach that point we could dissolve things fairly for both of us. Clara took a breath. This was it, the moment of decision. She could say no, could continue as they were and hope the gossip died down, could leave and try to find something else, somewhere else. Or she could take this leap, this strange, practical, honest leap with a man who'd shown her more respect in 3 weeks than Robert Fletcher had in months of letters. Then yes, she said, I'll marry you, Ethan Cole, on those terms, as a partnership. Something changed in Ethan's expression, not quite a smile, but close. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction. All right then, we'll do it properly this time. I'll talk to Pastor Williams tomorrow, arrange a ceremony. We'll post the bans, give people time to object if they're going to. Make it legal and public. How long will that take? A few weeks, probably. Unless... He hesitated. Unless you'd rather do it sooner, quietly, given how people are already talking. Clara considered. Part of her wanted exactly that, a quick, quiet wedding that would shut down the gossip immediately. But another part of her, the part that was tired of being treated like something shameful, wanted the opposite. No, she said firmly. We'll do it publicly. Let people see that this is a real marriage, entered into freely. I'm done hiding or apologizing for surviving. Ethan's expression shifted into something that might have been admiration. You're tougher than you look, you know that? I'm starting to realize it. They sat there in the lamplight, the ledgers forgotten, and for the first time since Clara had stepped off that stagecoach, she felt something like peace. This wasn't the future she'd imagined, but maybe, just maybe, it would be better. The next 3 weeks were a strange combination of normal routine and mounting anticipation. Ethan went to town and spoke with Pastor Williams, who agreed to perform the ceremony and began the process of posting the bans. The announcement caused exactly the stir Clara had expected. More gossip, more speculation, more knowing looks that suggested everyone had predicted this outcome. But there was also grudging acceptance. A marriage, even a hasty one, was more respectable than the alternative. Some of the sharper tongues in Dry Creek might suggest Clara had trapped Ethan into it, but at least she'd be a wife rather than something unnameable. Clara threw herself into work, partly to stay busy and partly to prove she could do this. Ethan had her help him with spring repairs, replacing fence posts, clearing brush, preparing the garden plot. She learned to anticipate what he'd need, to work alongside him with increasing efficiency. They developed a rhythm, a wordless communication born of shared labor. In the evenings, they talked, not about anything profound, just the small things that make up a life. Ethan told her about growing up on this ranch, about his father's stubborn insistence on doing things the hard way, about his mother who'd left when he was 12 and never looked back. Clara told him about Boston, about her father's declining years, about the slow erosion of their social position as debts mounted. They were getting to know each other, Clara realized, building the foundation that most couples built during courtship. Better late than never. One evening, about 2 weeks after they'd agreed to marry, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Ethan suddenly said, I should tell you something about why I live alone out here, why I haven't married before now. Clara waited, sensing this was important. I was engaged once, he continued, staring out at the darkening sky. 5 years ago. Her name was Sarah. She was from town, the daughter of the man who ran the mercantile. Pretty, sweet-natured, everything you're supposed to want in a wife. What happened? She came out here to visit, spent a week at the ranch, seeing what her life would be like. And at the end of that week, she told me she couldn't do it. Couldn't live this far from town, couldn't handle the isolation and the work. She wanted a house in Dry Creek, wanted me to give up ranching and find something else. When I said no, she ended it. I'm sorry. Don't be. She was right to end it. We wanted different things, but it taught me something. You can't build a life with someone unless you both want the same kind of life. That's why I waited. Why I didn't rush into courting someone just because I needed a wife. I needed to find someone who actually wanted this. He gestured at the land around them. Not someone who'd tolerate it or endure it, but someone who'd choose it. And you think I'm that person? Clara asked quietly. Ethan turned to look at her. I've watched you these past weeks. You're good at this work, Clara. Better than you probably realize. You don't just do what I ask. You see what needs doing and you do it. You're thinking about how to make this place better, more efficient. That tells me you're not just marking time, you're investing, building. That's what I need in a partner. Clara felt something warm bloom in her chest. It wasn't love. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the grand, passionate sense. But it was respect, recognition, the beginning of something solid and real. I do want this, she admitted. I didn't know I did until I got here, but yes, this life, this work, it suits me in ways Boston never did. Good. Ethan stood, offered her his hand. Then let's build something worth having. Clara took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. Standing there on the porch with the last light fading and the first stars appearing, she felt the weight of the decision she'd made. This was real now. In a week, she'd be Ethan Cole's wife. This ranch would be her home, not temporarily but permanently. It should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like the first honest choice she'd made in years. The wedding day arrived with cloudless skies and heat that promised to be brutal by afternoon. Clara dressed in her best dress again. The blue wool seemed to be getting a lot of use these days, and arranged her hair with hands that trembled slightly despite her determination to appear calm. Ethan had offered to buy her a new dress, something specifically for the wedding, but Clara had refused. She wasn't marrying him for his money or his resources. She was marrying him as an equal partner, and that meant not starting off by taking more than she needed. They rode to town together, side by side on their horses now that Clara could ride competently. A few early rising townspeople watched them pass, and Clara saw the calculations in their eyes. Some looked relieved. A wedding meant respectability restored. Others looked disappointed, as if they'd been hoping for a more scandalous outcome. The church was modest but full when they arrived. Word had spread, and it seemed half of Dry Creek had turned out to witness this unlikely union. Clara saw Edith Palmer from the boarding house, Mr. Parsons from the general store, George Hawkins looking distinctly uncomfortable. And there, in a pew near the front, sat Robert and Lydia Fletcher. Of course they'd come. Lydia wouldn't miss this for the world. Pastor Williams was waiting at the altar, his expression warm and encouraging. He told them yesterday that he was pleased to see them taking this step, that he believed they had a real chance at building something good together. The ceremony itself was simple, traditional, the words familiar even if the circumstances were anything but. Clara spoke her vows clearly, looking directly at Ethan as she promised to honor and respect him. When it came time for Ethan to speak his vows, his voice was steady and sure, and Clara believed every word he said. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, when Ethan leaned in to kiss her for the first time, a brief, chaste press of lips that nevertheless sent electricity through her, Clara heard the murmur of the congregation. Some approving, some skeptical, all of them judging. Let them judge, she thought. She'd made her choice. Now she'd live with it. Outside the church, people offered congratulations that ranged from genuine to perfunctory. Edith Palmer gave Clara a knowing smile. George Hawkins shook Ethan's hand and mumbled something about wishing them well. And then, inevitably, the Fletchers approached. "Congratulations," Lydia said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "How romantic, a whirlwind courtship." "Thank you, Mrs. Fletcher," Clara replied evenly. Robert shifted uncomfortably. "I hope you'll be very happy, Miss Witt. Mrs. Cole." He couldn't quite meet Clara's eyes. "I truly do." For a moment, Clara almost pitied him. He looked like a man trapped in choices he'd made, standing beside a wife who wielded cruelty like a weapon. But then she remembered the letters he'd written, the promises he'd made, the cowardice of his desertion, and the pity evaporated. "I will be," she said simply. "I've married an honest man. That's more than many women can say." The barb landed. Lydia's eyes narrowed. Robert flushed, but before either could respond, Ethan's hand settled on Clara's back, protective, grounding. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's go home." Home. The word settled in Clara's chest like an anchor. Yes, home. They rode back to the ranch as husband and wife, and Clara felt the shift in everything. This wasn't a trial period anymore. This wasn't temporary employment. This was her life now, the one she'd chosen, the one she'd build with her own hands alongside a man who'd offered her respect when everyone else offered pity or judgment. When they reached the ranch, Ethan helped her down from her horse with careful formality. They discussed this part awkwardly the night before. What would happen after the wedding, what the expectations were. Ethan had made it clear he wouldn't demand anything, wouldn't expect her to share his bed unless and until she wanted to. They'd continue as they had been, sleeping in separate rooms, letting whatever might develop between them do so naturally. Clara had been relieved and, strangely, a little disappointed, but she appreciated his restraint, his willingness to let her set the pace. "Well," Ethan said, standing in the main room of their house now, legally and truly. "I suppose we should celebrate somehow. I'm not sure what the appropriate celebration is for a marriage of practical convenience." Clara surprised herself by laughing. "I don't think there's a guidebook for our situation." "Probably not." Ethan smiled, and Clara realized she was seeing him smile more often now. It transformed his whole face, made him look younger, less burdened. "How about this? I'll cook dinner tonight, give you a break from the work for once." "You cook?" "Lived alone for 2 years, had to learn or starve." He headed toward the kitchen area. "Nothing fancy, but I can manage a decent stew." Clara watched him work, this man who was now her husband, and felt a strange contentment settle over her. They hadn't married for love, hadn't promised forever, but they'd promised honesty, partnership, respect. And maybe, Clara thought, that was enough. Maybe that was even better. As the evening darkened and they sat down to eat the meal Ethan had prepared, which was indeed a decent stew, Clara raised her water glass in a toast. "To honest partnerships," she said. Ethan clinked his glass against hers. "To building something that lasts." They drank, and Clara felt the truth of it. They were building something here, brick by brick, day by day. It might not look like anyone else's marriage. It might not be what she'd imagined when she'd boarded that stagecoach in Boston, but it was hers. And that made it worth every risk she'd taken to get here. The first month of marriage passed in a blur of work and adjustment. Clara found herself navigating the strange territory between what they were and what they might become. By day, they were partners in the fullest sense, working side by side, making decisions together, building the ranch into something stronger than it had been. By night, they retreated to separate rooms, the space between them both comfortable and charged with possibility. It was Clara who noticed the shift first, the way her heart would lift when she heard Ethan's footsteps on the porch, after he'd been out checking the fence line. The way she found herself watching him work, admiring the competent efficiency of his movements, the quiet confidence he brought to every task. She'd catch herself smiling at something he'd said hours earlier, replaying conversations in her mind as she kneaded bread or mended clothes. This wasn't the passionate, consuming love the novels back in Boston had promised. It was something quieter, more gradual, like a seed planted in good soil, given time and care to root properly before it could grow. One evening in late June, as they sat reviewing the month's accounts, Ethan made a notation and then paused, pen hovering over the ledger. "We're actually showing a profit this month," he said, sounding almost surprised. "A real one. Since you've been managing the books, organizing the expenses, we're spending less and earning more." Clara leaned over to look at the numbers, feeling a flush of pride. She'd implemented a system for tracking everything, had negotiated better rates with the suppliers in town, had found small inefficiencies and corrected them. The work had been tedious but satisfying. "It's not just the bookkeeping," she said. "You've been working smarter too. That new grazing rotation you started has the cattle in better condition." That was your suggestion. You're the one who made it work. Clara met his eyes. We make a good team, Ethan. Yes, he said quietly. We do. The moment stretched between them, weighted with things unsaid. Then Ethan cleared his throat and returned to the ledger, and Clara felt the opportunity slip away. But it wasn't gone, she realized. Just waiting for the right time. The right time came 2 weeks later, in a way neither of them expected. Clara woke in the middle of the night to the sound of thrashing in the next room. At first she thought someone had broken in, and her heart hammered as she reached for the oil lamp. But then she heard Ethan's voice, rough with pain, calling out something incoherent. She was through his door before she could think better of it, lamp held high. Ethan was on his bed, tangled in sheets, his face contorted. In the lamplight she could see he was burning with fever, his shirt soaked with sweat. Ethan. Clara set the lamp down and touched his forehead. He was blazing hot. Ethan, can you hear me? His eyes opened, unfocused and glassy. Clara, I don't... Something's wrong. You're sick. Let me see. Where does it hurt? Everywhere. My head. My stomach. He tried to sit up and immediately fell back. Earlier today, I felt off. Thought it was just the heat. Clara's mind raced through possibilities. Fever, stomach pain, weakness. It could be any number of things, some serious, some not. But out here, miles from town and a doctor, even minor illnesses could become dangerous. I'm going to get you some water and cool cloths, she said, trying to keep her voice calm. Try to stay still. For the next hour, Clara worked with single-minded focus. She brought water and coaxed Ethan to drink small sips. She soaked cloths in cool water and laid them on his forehead, his neck, his wrists, anywhere she could to help bring down the fever. She'd nursed her father through illnesses. She knew the basics, but her father had died anyway, and the memory of that failure made her hands shake as she wrung out another cloth. Clara! Ethan's voice was weak but clearer. The fever seemed to be breaking slightly, at least for the moment. You should go back to bed. You'll wear yourself out. Don't be ridiculous, she placed a fresh cloth on his forehead. I'm not leaving you like this. I've been sick before. I'll manage. Yes, and when you were sick before, who took care of you? Clara fixed him with a stern look. You're my husband, Ethan. In sickness and in health, remember? I meant those vows, even if they were practical ones. Something shifted in Ethan's fever-bright eyes. Clara. Hush, save your strength. But she took his hand, held it firmly. I'm not going anywhere. By dawn, the worst of the fever had broken. Ethan was weak, exhausted, but the crisis had passed. Clara, slumped in the chair she'd pulled beside his bed, jerked awake when he said her name. I'm here. She straightened, her back protesting the awkward position she'd slept in. How do you feel? Like I've been kicked by a horse, but better. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and Clara became suddenly aware of how she must appear. Her hair was falling out of its braid, her nightgown was wrinkled, and she probably had circles under her eyes. You stayed all night, he said. Of course I did. You didn't have to. Ethan, Clara squeezed his hand, which she'd apparently still been holding. Yes, I did. We're partners, remember? That means taking care of each other. Partners. Ethan's thumb moved against her palm, a small gesture that sent warmth through her. Is that still what we are, Clara? Just partners? Her breath caught. This was the question that had been hovering between them for weeks, maybe longer. The question neither of them had quite dared to ask. I don't know, she said honestly. What do you want us to be? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I want you to know something. These past 2 months, working with you, talking with you, building this life together, it's been the best time I can remember. You're smart, capable, strong, but more than that, He paused, searching for words. You're genuine, real. There's no pretense with you, no games, and I've come to... He stopped again, then finished simply, I've come to care for you more than I expected, more than I probably should have, given how this started. Claire's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. I care for you too, she whispered. I didn't expect to. I thought this would always be just an arrangement, just two people helping each other survive. But it's become more than that. You've become more than that. So what do we do about it? Ethan asked. Clara looked down at their joined hands. His was larger, rougher, marked by the work he did every day. Hers was smaller, but no longer soft. The ranch had left its mark on her, too. They fit together well, she thought, in more ways than one. We could start by not sleeping in separate rooms, she said, feeling bold and terrified all at once. If you want that, if you're ready. Ethan's grip tightened on her hand. Are you sure? I don't want to rush you. Don't want you to feel obligated because you took care of me tonight. I'm sure. And she was. This felt right in a way nothing in Boston ever had. Not tonight. You need to rest and recover, but soon, when you're well. Soon, Ethan agreed, and the promise in that word made Clara's pulse race. She made him breakfast, weak tea and dry toast, nothing that would upset his stomach, and spent the day monitoring his recovery. By evening, Ethan was well enough to sit up, to complain about being treated like an invalid, to insist he'd be back to work tomorrow despite Clara's protests. You'll rest another day at least, she said firmly. The ranch won't fall apart in 24 hours. You're very bossy when you're worried, Ethan observed, but there was affection in his voice. And you're very stubborn when you're recovering. Clara sat on the edge of his bed, felt the mattress dip under her weight. But I'm going to win this argument, so you might as well surrender now. Is that how our marriage is going to work? You winning all the arguments? Only the important ones, Clara smiled. You can win the trivial ones if it makes you feel better. Ethan laughed, then winced. Don't make me laugh. Everything still hurts. Then behave yourself. But Clara reached out and brushed the hair back from his forehead, a gesture of tenderness she wouldn't have dared a week ago. Get some sleep. I'll be in the next room if you need anything. Clara. Ethan caught her hand before she could pull away. Thank you for taking care of me, for staying. Always, she said, and meant it. The next 3 days were a strange sort of intimacy. Ethan recovered slowly, and Clara found herself spending more time in his room, bringing meals, changing bandages where the fever had caused him to thrash and injure himself, simply sitting and talking while he rested. They talked about everything and nothing. Ethan told her stories about his childhood, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about his mother who'd never been suited for ranch life. Clara talked about Boston, about the social pretenses she'd been so desperate to maintain, about how liberation could sometimes look like loss. Do you miss it? Ethan asked one afternoon. The city, the life you had there? Clara considered the question seriously. Sometimes I miss certain things, the symphony, the libraries, being able to walk to a market instead of planning supply trips days in advance, but the life itself. She shook her head. No, that life was about appearing successful while slowly drowning. This life is about actually building something real. I'll take real over appearances any day. Even when real means mucking out stables and dealing with stubborn cattle? Even then, Clara smiled. Besides, I'm getting quite good at mucking out stables. I have an excellent teacher. Flattery won't get you out of your turn tomorrow. Worth a try, though. By the 4th day, Ethan was well enough to insist on returning to work, though Clara made him promise to take it easy. She watched him move through the ranch tasks with his usual competence, but she noticed he tired more quickly, needed more breaks. She didn't comment on it, just made sure he had water readily available, that lunch was ready when he needed to rest. That evening, after supper, Ethan stood and extended his hand to Clara. Walk with me? They walked out into the gathering dusk, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. The heat of the day was finally releasing its grip, and a breeze carried the scent of prairie grass and distant rain. Ethan led her to a spot overlooking the south pasture, where they could see the cattle grazing peacefully in the fading light. I've been thinking, Ethan said, still holding her hand, about what you said, about not sleeping in separate rooms. Clara's pulse quickened. And I think you're right. It's time. He turned to face her fully. But I want you to understand something first. This isn't just about sharing a bed, Clara. It's about sharing everything, our lives, our dreams, our fears. I want a real marriage with you, not just a partnership or an arrangement. I want... He paused, then said the words carefully, deliberately. I want to love you, and I want you to love me. If you can, if that's something you'd want. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. This man, this honest, straightforward man who'd given her choice when she had none, who'd respected her boundaries and waited for her to be ready, who was now standing here offering her his whole heart without reservation. How could she not love him? I already do, she said softly. Love you, I mean. I think I have for a while now. I just didn't know how to say it. Ethan's expression transformed, the careful control he usually maintained slipping away to reveal pure joy. Really? Really? Clara reached up and touched his face, feeling the slight roughness of stubble under her palm. You're a good man, Ethan Cole, an honest one. And you've made me believe in promises again, in futures. In myself. He kissed her then, not the chaste press of lips from their wedding, but something deeper, more certain. Clara kissed him back, pouring into it everything she'd been holding back, all the affection and desire and hope she'd been too careful to express. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. Come to bed with me, he said quietly. Really with me, as my wife in every sense. Yes, Clara whispered. Yes. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when Ethan led her to his room, their room now, Clara felt no fear, no hesitation. This was right. This was what she wanted. Not because she had no other choice, not because it was practical or necessary, but because she loved this man and wanted to build a life with him that was full and real and complete. The morning after brought a different kind of intimacy. Clara woke wrapped in Ethan's arms, his body warm against hers, and felt contentment settle deep in her bones. This was what marriage should be, she thought. Not a business transaction or a social necessity, but a choice made freely by two people who wanted to wake up together every morning. Ethan stirred, tightened his arms around her. Morning, he murmured into her hair. Morning. Clara turned in his embrace to face him. We should probably get up. The cattle won't feed themselves. The cattle can wait 5 more minutes. Ethan kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. I want to savor this. My wife in my arms. Our life starting properly. Clara smiled against his mouth. Our life started properly the day I arrived at this ranch. Everything else has just been details. Important details, though. The best details. They did eventually get up, did eventually return to the work that was always waiting, but something fundamental had shifted. They moved through the day touching more. A hand on the back, fingers brushing as they passed tools, stolen kisses when they thought no one was watching. Though, of course, there was no one to watch, which was its own kind of freedom. That afternoon, as they worked together in the garden Clara had started, planting vegetables for the winter, Ethan said, I've been thinking about expanding the cattle operation. There's good grazing land to the west that occasionally comes up for lease. If we could secure it, we could double our herd size in 2 years. Can we afford the lease? Clara's mind was already calculating costs and potential returns. With careful management, yes, especially if the next few months continue as profitably as the last few. Ethan paused in his digging. But I wanted to discuss it with you first. This would be a major decision, more risk, more work, but potentially more reward. Clara sat back on her heels, considering. A few months ago, she wouldn't have had any opinion on cattle operations and leased grazing land. Now, having learned the business from the inside out, she could see the possibilities and the pitfalls. I think we should do it, she said finally. But we'd need to be strategic. Increase the herd gradually, not all at once. Make sure we have the resources to handle problems if they arise. And we should diversify too, not put everything into cattle. Keep building the horse breeding program. Maybe look into selling produce from the garden once it's established. Ethan was staring at her with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. What? She asked. You're remarkable. You know that? Clara felt herself flush. I'm just being practical. You're being brilliant. This is exactly the kind of thinking I needed, the kind of partnership I hoped for but wasn't sure I'd find. He leaned over and kissed her, heedless of the dirt on both of them. I love you, Clara Cole. I should have said it last night, but I'm saying it now. I love you. The words settled into Clara's heart like missing pieces finally finding their place. "I love you too," she said. "And I choose you, Ethan. Every day I choose you. Even when I'm being stubborn about resting when I'm sick? Even then, though I reserve the right to be extremely bossy about it." They returned to their planting, but Clara found herself smiling as she worked. She'd come to Texas expecting one kind of life and had been handed complete disaster instead. But from that disaster, she'd built something better than anything she could have imagined. A real partnership. A true marriage. A love that was grounded in respect and honesty and shared work. The evening brought unexpected visitors. Clara was preparing supper when she heard horses approaching. Ethan went to the door, his hand automatically moving to where he kept his rifle, cautious, as anyone living this far from town learned to be. But his posture relaxed when he saw who it was. "Pastor Williams," he called, "and is that Ben Morrison?" Clara joined him at the door and saw two men on horseback. Pastor Williams she recognized. The other man was younger, perhaps 40, with a weather-beaten face and kind eyes. "Evening, Ethan," Pastor Williams said as they dismounted. "Sorry to arrive unannounced. We were out this way and thought we'd stop in. Ben here wanted to meet your wife." Ben Morrison removed his hat and nodded to Clara. "Mrs. Cole, pleasure to meet you properly. I'm a rancher too, about 8 miles north of here. Heard you and Ethan had married, wanted to welcome you to the community." "That's very kind," Clara said, surprised by the genuine warmth in his voice. "Won't you both come in? I was just making supper. There's plenty for 4. Over the meal, Clara learned that Ben Morrison was a widower who'd been ranching in Texas for 20 years. He and Ethan had known each other casually, had helped each other with cattle drives and large projects that required multiple hands. Ben's visit, Clara realized, was partly social and partly an evaluation. He wanted to see what kind of woman Ethan had married, whether she was suited for this life. "Ethan tells me you've taken over the ranch accounts," Ben said, accepting a second helping of stew. "That's no small task. Ranching's as much bookkeeping as it is cattle work." "I'm learning that," Clara replied. "Though I had some experience with accounts from helping my father. The principles are similar, just applied differently." "And you're managing the household and helping with ranch work. That's a full plate." "It keeps me busy," Clara agreed, "but I prefer busy to idle. And I like seeing the results of the work. In Boston, I spent most of my time maintaining appearances. Here, I can build something real." Ben exchanged a glance with Pastor Williams. "Ethan, you found yourself a good one. Smart and practical. That's worth more than gold out here." Pastor Williams smiled. "I could see that when they came to me about getting married. Some couples, you can tell they're making a mistake. These two? I knew they'd be just fine." After the meal, as Clara cleared the dishes, she heard Ben say to Ethan, "If you two need help with that expansion you're planning, let me know. I've got extra hands sometimes, and we could work out an arrangement. Good neighbors help each other out here." Clara felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer heat. This was community, real community. Not the artificial social climbing of Boston, but people who supported each other because survival out here required cooperation. She was part of this now, part of something bigger than just herself and Ethan. After their guests left, Clara and Ethan cleaned up together in comfortable silence. When everything was put away, Ethan pulled Clara into his arms. "You impressed Ben," he said. "That's not easy to do. He's seen plenty of city women try ranch life and fail." "I'm not trying," Clara said. "I'm doing. There's a difference." "Yes, there is." Ethan kissed her temple. "Come to bed, wife. We've got an early start tomorrow." As they settled into bed together, a novelty that still sent thrills through Clara, she found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her here. The letters from Robert Fletcher that had seemed like salvation. The devastating arrival in Dry Creek. The humiliation and fear and absolute uncertainty. And then Ethan, stepping forward when he had no obligation to, offering her something no one else had, choice, dignity, partnership. She'd taken that offer out of desperation at first, but it had grown into something neither of them had expected. Something precious and real and worth fighting for. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, his breath warm against her hair. "That I'm grateful Robert Fletcher broke his promises," Clara said honestly. "If he'd kept them, I'd have married him and been miserable. I'd never have known what a real marriage could be. Fletcher's an idiot. Yes, but his loss was your gain, and mine. Ethan was quiet for a moment, then said, Do you know what I thought when I first saw you? Standing there in the street, being told your future had just collapsed? What? I thought you looked like a fighter, like someone who'd been knocked down but wasn't going to stay down. And I wanted to be there when you got back up, wanted to see what you'd build from the ruins. He pulled her closer. I'm glad I was right. Glad I got to be part of it. Clara turned in his arms to kiss him properly. We're building it together, she said. That's what makes it work. Together, Ethan agreed. That's what makes everything work. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, secure in what they'd built and excited about what they'd build next. Outside, the Texas stars blazed in a sky that went on forever, and somewhere in the darkness, the cattle lowed peacefully, and the land that was theirs, truly theirs now, stretched away into the night. Clara dreamed of gardens and ledgers and children she hadn't thought to want until now. She dreamed of seasons passing, of the ranch growing, of herself and Ethan growing old together on this land they both loved. And when she woke in the morning to find Ethan already up, to hear him moving around the house preparing coffee and starting breakfast because he wanted to let her sleep in, she knew that the best parts of those dreams were already coming true. This was her life now. Not the one she'd planned, not the one she'd expected, but the one she'd chosen, and the one that had chosen her right back. And it was better than anything she could have imagined in those desperate days when she'd boarded a stagecoach in Boston, heading west with nothing but a trunk full of belongings and a handful of hope. She'd been replaced, yes, but in being replaced, she'd been set free. Free to find something real, something honest, something that was entirely, completely, wonderfully hers. The seasons turned as they always did in Texas, sudden and absolute. Summer's brutal heat gave way to autumn's blessed relief, and Clara found herself marveling at how different the land looked with each passing month. The grass turned gold and amber, the air carried a chill in the mornings, and the work shifted to preparing for winter. They moved cattle to better shelter, stockpiled hay, repaired anything that might not survive harsh weather. Clara threw herself into the preparations with the same intensity she brought to everything now. She canned vegetables from the garden, preserved meat, organized supplies with military precision. Ethan watched her work with a mixture of admiration and amusement. We're not going to starve, you know, he said one afternoon as Clara surveyed her rows of preserved goods with satisfaction. Even if we get snowed in for a month. Better too much than too little, Clara replied. Besides, if we have surplus, we can trade with Ben Morrison or others. Everything has value out here. Listen to you, sounding like you've been ranching your whole life. Ethan pulled her away from her inventory, wrapped his arms around her waist. Sometimes I forget you've only been here 6 months. 6 months? Clara could hardly believe it. Half a year ago, she'd been standing in the dust of Dry Creek's main street, humiliated and abandoned, with no idea what her future held. Now she was standing in her own home, in the arms of a man she loved, looking at the fruits of labor that made her proud and tired and satisfied all at once. Best 6 months of my life, she said honestly, leaning back against him. Mine too. Ethan kissed the top of her head, though I have a feeling the next 6 will be even better. He was right, though not in ways either of them expected. The letter arrived in late October, brought by a rider who'd picked up mail in Dry Creek. Clara didn't recognize the handwriting on the envelope, but the return address made her breath catch. Boston. From her cousin, Margaret, one of the relatives who'd made it clear Clara was a burden they wouldn't carry after her father died. Clara stared at the envelope for a long moment before opening it, trying to prepare herself for whatever news it contained. When she finally broke the seal and unfolded the pages, Ethan came to stand beside her, reading over her shoulder. The letter was stiff and formal, but its content was clear enough. Margaret's husband had died unexpectedly, leaving her with 3 children and mounting debts. She'd heard through mutual acquaintances that Clara had married well in Texas, was now a woman of property and means. Could Clara possibly see her way to lending Margaret $500 to tide her over until the estate was settled? The nerve, Ethan said quietly. She threw you out when you needed help and now she's asking you for money? Clara read the letter again, looking for any hint of apology or acknowledgement of how Margaret had treated her. There was none. just desperation dressed up in polite language. She has children, Clara said slowly. 3 of them, she says. And debts. That's not your responsibility. No, but I remember what it felt like, being desperate, having nowhere to turn. Clara set the letter down on the table. If you and Ben Morrison and Pastor Williams hadn't stepped in when they did, I might have ended up writing letters like this, begging strangers for help. Ethan was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What do you want to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? What did Clara want to do? Part of her wanted to write back with a curt refusal, wanted Margaret to feel the same rejection Clara had felt. But the larger part of her, the part that had been forged in these 6 months of building something from nothing, couldn't quite do it. "I want to help," Clara said finally, "but not like she's asking. I'm not going to send her $500 she'll probably never repay, but I could send something, enough to keep her children fed for a few months while she figures things out. $50, maybe. That's generous, considering how she treated you. It's not for her, it's for those children who didn't choose their circumstances any more than I chose mine." Clara looked up at Ethan. "And honestly, it's also for me. So I can be the kind of person who helps even when it's not deserved. That's who I want to be." Ethan pulled her close, kissed her forehead. "You're already that person, Clara. You've always been that person. It's one of the things I love most about you." They sent $50 with a brief note explaining that it was all they could spare, and that Clara hoped Margaret's situation would improve. Clara didn't expect gratitude, and she didn't receive any, but she felt lighter having made the choice, having extended a hand even to someone who'd refused to extend one to her. "You're too good for this world sometimes," Ethan said as they sealed the envelope. "No, I'm just trying to be better than my worst moments." Clara smiled at him. "Same as everyone else." November brought the first real cold, and with it, unexpected news from town. Ethan returned from a supply run with a strange expression on his face, something between amusement and satisfaction. "You'll never guess what I heard in Dry Creek," he said, helping Clara unload supplies. "What?" "Robert Fletcher's freight company is failing, badly. Apparently he overextended himself trying to keep up with Lydia's expectations, made some poor investments, and now he's hemorrhaging money. Word is they might have to sell the house." Clara absorbed this information, waiting for the surge of vindication she'd expected to feel. But it didn't come. Instead, she felt something closer to pity. "That's unfortunate," she said quietly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Unfortunate? This is the man who abandoned you, who humiliated you publicly. I thought you'd be pleased." "So did I." Clara set down the flour sack she'd been carrying. "But I'm not. I'm just tired of it all. Tired of carrying around anger and hurt. Fletcher made his choices, I made mine. His choices turned out poorly and mine turned out well. That's justice enough, isn't it?" "You're a better person than I am," Ethan said. "I'm enjoying his downfall quite a bit." Clara laughed despite herself. "Well, one of us can be petty then. I'll be magnanimous." But the news about Fletcher's troubles set off a chain of events that would test Clara's magnanimity more than she'd expected. 2 weeks later, Robert Fletcher himself appeared at their ranch, riding alone and looking haggard. Clara saw him coming from the kitchen window and felt her stomach tighten. "Ethan," she called, "we have a visitor. You should come here." Ethan appeared at her side, his jaw tightening when he saw who it was. "Stay inside," he said. "I'll handle this." "No." Clara put her hand on his arm. "We'll handle this together." They went out onto the porch as Fletcher dismounted. Up close, the man looked even worse, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes and a defeated slump to his shoulders. This wasn't the prosperous businessman who'd written those careful letters. This was a man at the end of his rope. "Mr. Cole." "Clara." Fletcher removed his hat, twisted it in his hands. "Thank you for seeing me. I know I have no right to ask for your time." "Then why are you here?" Ethan's voice was cold. Fletcher flinched, but pressed on. "I came to apologize, to Clara especially. What I did, breaking my promise, not even having the courage to face you myself, it was cowardly and wrong. I've known it was wrong every day since, but I was too proud to admit it. too afraid of Lydia's reaction if I showed weakness. Clara studied him, trying to determine if this was genuine or just another manipulation. "And now?" she asked. "Why now?" "Because I've lost everything anyway." Fletcher laughed bitterly. "The business is failing. Lydia's left me, moved back to her own property, and filed for divorce. She made it clear she married me for my prospects, and since those are gone, so is she. And I'm standing here realizing that I destroyed the one honest thing I had going, my arrangement with you, chasing after money and status that turned out to be worthless." "That's not an apology," Ethan said. "That's just you feeling sorry for yourself." "You're right." Fletcher looked directly at Clara. "I'm sorry, Miss Witt, Mrs. Cole. I'm sorry I lied to you. I'm sorry I broke my promises, and I'm sorry I let you come all this way only to humiliate you. You deserved better. You deserved honesty, and I was too much of a coward to give it to you." The words hung in the air. Clara felt Ethan tense beside her, ready to tell Fletcher to leave. But she found herself speaking first. "Thank you for saying that," she said quietly. "It doesn't change what happened, doesn't undo the hurt, but I appreciate hearing it." Fletcher nodded, seeming to deflate further. "I should go. I needed you to know. Needed to say it out loud." He started to turn toward his horse, then stopped. "For what it's worth, Cole, you're a lucky man. She's remarkable." "I know," Ethan said simply. They watched Fletcher ride away, his figure growing smaller against the autumn landscape. When he was gone, Clara let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "How do you feel?" Ethan asked, his arm coming around her shoulders. "I feel free," Clara said, surprised by the truth of it. "I didn't realize I was still carrying all that around, the hurt and anger and humiliation. But hearing him apologize, seeing how his choices destroyed him while mine built something good, it's like putting down a weight I didn't know I was carrying. You could have been cruel to him. He deserved it." "Maybe. But what would that gain me?" Clara leaned into Ethan's warmth. "I have everything I need right here. I don't need revenge or vindication. I just need this. Us, the life we're building." Ethan kissed her temple. "Have I mentioned lately that I love you?" "Not in the last hour, at least." "Terrible oversight on my part. I love you, Clara Cole. More than I thought I was capable of loving anyone." "I love you too." Clara turned in his arms to face him. "Now come inside. Come. We have work to do, and I'm not spending the afternoon dwelling on Robert Fletcher's problems. We have better things to focus on." December arrived with a cold snap that made even Texans complain, and with it came news that made Clara's heart soar. She'd suspected for a few weeks, had noticed the subtle changes in her body, the morning queasiness that passed by midday. But she'd waited to be sure before saying anything to Ethan. She chose a quiet evening after supper, when they were sitting by the fire with coffee and the comfortable silence that came from two people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. "Ethan," she said, "I have something to tell you." He looked up from the book he'd been reading, immediately attentive. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong." Clara set down her coffee cup, suddenly nervous despite the joy bubbling up inside her. "Everything's very right, actually. I'm pregnant." For a moment, Ethan just stared at her. Then his face transformed, pure, unguarded joy spreading across his features. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor confirming it. But yes, all the signs are there. I'd say I'm about 2 months along, which means the baby should come in early summer." Ethan was across the room in 3 strides, pulling Clara to her feet and into his arms. "A baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." "Yes." Clara laughed at his enthusiasm, at the way he was looking at her like she'd just given him the world. "Are you pleased?" "Pleased. Clara, He pulled back to look at her face, his hands cupping her cheeks. "I'm overwhelmed, terrified, excited, all of it at once. A baby, our family, growing. It's everything." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about what would need to be done before the baby arrived. They'd need to set up a nursery, stock supplies, make sure they had access to a midwife when the time came. Ethan wanted to hire more help for the ranch, so Clara wouldn't have to work as hard in her later months. Clara wanted to make sure the accounts were perfectly organized so someone else could manage them if needed. But underneath all the practical talk was pure joy. They were going to be parents. The life they'd built together was about to expand in the most fundamental way possible. Word spread through the community quickly, as news always did in small towns. Pastor Williams came by to offer congratulations and assurances that there were several experienced midwives in the area who could help when the time came. Ben Morrison's wife Sarah, who Clara had met only a few times but liked immediately, arrived with advice and offers of help. Even people in town who'd been cool to Clara after her marriage seemed to soften slightly at the news of the coming baby. But the most unexpected visit came in January, when Lydia Fletcher, no longer Fletcher, Clara learned, as the divorce had been finalized, arrived at the ranch looking nothing like her former imperious self. "Mrs. Cole," she said when Clara answered the door, her voice lacking its usual edge. "May I speak with you? I won't take much of your time." Clara considered sending her away. This woman had been cruel to her, had spread gossip, had tried to undermine her marriage at every turn. But something in Lydia's expression, a vulnerability Clara had never seen before, made her step aside. "Come in. But Ethan stays." Ethan had appeared at Clara's shoulder, protective and wary. The three of them sat in the main room, tension thick in the air. Lydia spoke without preamble. "I came to apologize. For everything. For how I treated you when you first arrived. For the things I said about your marriage. For trying to make you feel small and ashamed. It was cruel and unnecessary, and I'm sorry." Clara exchanged a glance with Ethan. This was the second unexpected apology in 3 months. "What changed?" she asked. "Everything." Lydia's laugh was bitter. "I lost my husband, my standing in the community, my carefully constructed life, and in losing it all, I realized how much of it was built on making other people feel inferior so I could feel superior. It's an ugly truth to face about yourself." "Yes," Clara said quietly. "It is." "You had every right to fail," Lydia continued. "Every reason to crumble under the weight of what Robert did to you. I think part of me wanted you to fail, wanted to see you broken, because it would have validated my choices, would have proved that money and status matter more than character. But you didn't fail. You built something real and good, and it made me confront how hollow my own life was." Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "What will you do now?" "Return to my family's property, I suppose. Try to rebuild. Maybe learn to be less of a terrible person." Lydia stood, preparing to leave. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I see now what I couldn't see before. You were never the problem. I was." After she'd gone, Clara sat back down heavily. "Well," she said, "that was unexpected." "People can change, I suppose," Ethan said, "though I'm not convinced her change will stick." "Maybe not, but at least she tried. That's something." Clara placed a hand on her still flat stomach, thinking about the baby growing there, about the world this child would be born into. "I want our child to grow up seeing that people deserve second chances, that you can make mistakes and still become better. That's important." "Then that's what we'll teach them," Ethan agreed, his hand covering hers. Winter gave way to spring, and Clara's pregnancy became more obvious. Her body changed, swelling with the new life inside her. And while the physical challenges were real, the backaches, the tiredness, the way simple tasks became suddenly difficult, she found herself marveling at it. She was creating a person, someone who would be part her and part Ethan, and entirely their own being. Ethan was attentive to the point of being comical, constantly worried she was doing too much or not resting enough. Clara bore his hovering with amused patience, knowing it came from love and excitement rather than any desire to control her. In April, a letter arrived from Boston. From Margaret again, but this one was different. It was a thank you, stiff and formal but genuine, for the money Clara had sent. Margaret's situation had stabilized, and she'd found work that would support her family. She didn't apologize for how she'd treated Clara before, but she did acknowledge that Clara's kindness had made a real difference. "Look at that," Ethan said when Clara showed him the letter. "Good things coming back around." "Maybe." Clara filed the letter away. She was done looking backward, done dwelling on the past. Her focus was entirely on the future now, on the baby coming in June, on the ranch that continued to thrive under their joint management, on the life she and Ethan were building together. May brought a late cold snap that had everyone worried about the cattle, but they weathered it well thanks to the preparations Clara and Ethan had made the previous fall. As Clara's due date approached, Sarah Morrison came to stay at the ranch, bringing with her the experience of having birthed 5 children and helping countless others through the process. "You'll do fine," Sarah assured Clara when she arrived. "You're strong, you're healthy, and you've got a good man who'll support you through it. That's all you really need." The baby arrived on a sweltering June afternoon, after 18 hours of labor that left Clara exhausted and exhilarated and completely in love. It was a girl, perfect and red-faced and absolutely furious about being born, if her lusty cries were any indication. Ethan held his daughter with shaking hands, tears streaming unabashedly down his face. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She's perfect. Clara, she's ours," Clara finished, reaching up to touch the baby's tiny hand. "She's ours." They named her Margaret Rose. Margaret after Clara's mother, Rose after Ethan's. She was by all objective measures an ordinary baby. She cried and ate and slept in the chaotic rhythm that all newborns followed. But to Clara and Ethan, she was a miracle. Clara spent the first weeks after Margaret's birth in a fog of exhaustion and overwhelming love. Ethan took over more of the ranch work, hired additional help as he'd promised, and still found time to walk the floors with Margaret when she cried at night, to bring Clara meals when she forgot to eat, to simply sit beside them and watch his daughter sleep with wonder on his face. "I can't believe we made this," he said one night, his finger tracing Margaret's tiny features. "This perfect little person who's part both of us." "Neither can I," Clara admitted. She was tired down to her bones, her body still recovering from childbirth, her life completely transformed by this small, demanding creature, and she'd never been happier. August came, and with it, Clara's first real venture back into town since before Margaret's birth. She went with Ethan and the baby, prepared for whatever reception she might receive. But something had shifted in the intervening months. Maybe it was the baby. People softened around babies. Maybe it was simply that time had passed and newer scandals had replaced the old one. Whatever the reason, Clara found herself greeted with genuine warmth by people who'd once viewed her with suspicion. "She's beautiful," women cooed over Margaret. "Just beautiful. You must be so proud." "We are," Clara said simply, and meant it. They stopped at the general store for supplies, and Mr. Parsons insisted on giving Margaret a little wooden rattle he'd carved himself. "For the young miss," he said gruffly. "Welcome to the world, little one." Outside, Clara saw a familiar figure across the street, Robert Fletcher, looking older but somehow more settled than the last time she'd seen him. He noticed her too, tipped his hat respectfully, but made no move to approach. Clara nodded back, a simple acknowledgement that held no animosity, no lingering hurt. Just two people who'd crossed paths once and had gone on to live very different lives. "You all right?" Ethan asked, following her gaze. "Yes." Clara adjusted Margaret in her arms, feeling the solid weight of her daughter, the reality of the life she'd built. "I'm more than all right. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The autumn of 1877 found the coal ranch thriving in ways Clara hadn't imagined possible a year earlier. The expansion they'd planned had worked out well, the cattle operation was profitable, and they'd even begun selling horses to neighboring ranches. The accounts Clara kept showed steady growth, and they'd been able to save enough to start planning real improvements, a proper barn, maybe an addition to the house for when Margaret got older and needed her own room. More than that, though, they'd built a community. Ben Morrison and his family were regular visitors, as were several other ranching families in the area. Clara had become friends with Sarah Morrison and 2 other ranch wives, women who understood the particular challenges and joys of this life. They shared advice, traded supplies, helped each other through difficulties. It was nothing like the social circles of Boston, with their rigid hierarchies and carefully maintained facades. This was real friendship, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. One evening in October, almost exactly a year and a half after Clara had first arrived in Dry Creek, she sat on the porch with Margaret sleeping in her arms, while Ethan finished some late work in the barn. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Clara found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She'd come to Texas expecting one life and had been handed disaster instead. But from that disaster, she'd built something she never could have imagined. She'd found work that challenged and satisfied her. She'd found a partner who respected and loved her. She'd found a community that accepted her. And she'd found herself, or maybe created herself, forged in the heat and struggle of those early months into someone stronger and more capable than she'd known she could be. Ethan emerged from the barn and joined her on the porch, settling into the chair beside hers. For a while they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked eventually. "About how strange life is," Clara said. "How the worst thing that ever happened to me turned out to be the best thing. If Robert Fletcher had kept his promises, I'd be living a completely different life right now. Probably an unhappy one, married to a man I didn't love, pretending to be satisfied with an empty life. Instead, you're stuck with me, working yourself to exhaustion on a ranch in the middle of nowhere." Clara smiled. "Instead, I'm partnered with you, building something meaningful with my own hands, raising our daughter in a place where she can grow up strong and free and certain of her own worth. That's not being stuck. That's being blessed." "Blessed?" Ethan repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I suppose it is." He reached over and took her free hand. "I love you, Clara. More now than even when we married. Every day I love you more." "I love you too." Clara squeezed his hand. "Thank you for seeing something worth saving in that woman standing in the street that day. Thank you for offering me a choice when everyone else was trying to decide my future for me." "Thank you for choosing this," Ethan replied. "For choosing me. For building this life with me. For making me happier than I knew I could be." They sat there as the sun set completely, and the stars began to emerge, their daughter sleeping peacefully between them, their land stretching away into the gathering darkness. This was home. This was family. This was the life Clara had been meant to live all along. She just had to lose everything to find it. In the distance, a coyote howled, and from the barn came the soft sounds of horses settling for the night. The wind carried the scent of prairie grass and coming rain. Everything was exactly as it should be. Clara thought about the woman she'd been 18 months ago, frightened, humiliated, uncertain of everything. That woman had been replaced, yes, but in the most important way possible. She'd been replaced by someone stronger, someone more certain, someone who knew her own worth and wouldn't settle for anything less than she deserved. She'd come to Texas as a mail-order bride who'd been told she wasn't wanted. She'd stayed as a woman who'd chosen her own path and built her own future, and she'd become something she'd never expected to be. Truly, completely, unconditionally happy. Robert Fletcher had done her a favor when he'd broken his promises, though he'd never know it. He'd freed her to find something real, something honest, something that was entirely, beautifully, perfectly hers. "We should go in," Ethan said softly as the temperature began to drop. "Don't want Margaret to catch a chill." "In a minute." Clara wasn't quite ready to leave this moment, this perfect evening that felt like a summation of everything they'd built together. "Just one more minute." Ethan settled back in his chair, content to wait, and Clara closed her eyes and breathed in the night air of Texas. Her home now, truly and completely. She'd traveled 2,000 miles to get here, had survived heartbreak and humiliation and crushing uncertainty. But she'd made it. Not just survived, but thrived. She was Clara Cole, rancher's wife, keeper of accounts, mother, partner, survivor. She was exactly who she was meant to be, living exactly the life she was meant to live. And if given the choice to go back and change anything, to have Robert Fletcher keep his promises, to never board that stagecoach, to choose any different path, she wouldn't change a single thing. This life, this man, this daughter, this land, they were worth every moment of pain it had taken to find them. They were worth everything. "All right," she said finally, standing carefully so as not to wake Margaret. "Let's go inside. Let's go home." And that's exactly what they did.